Charlotte Bennet did not weep when Nathaniel Whitmore told her never to speak to him. She stood in her wedding dress, hands folded, chin raised, and looked the most powerful man in Virginia directly in the eye. Then she said very quietly, "As you wish," and turned away first. That single act of dignity on the worst night of her life would become the first thing Nathaniel ever regretted. If you're new here, subscribe and follow this story to the very end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. The summer of 1816 came to Virginia hard and unforgiving, the way most things came to Charlotte Bennet that year. Her father's estate had not always been a place of quiet desperation. She remembered mornings when the tobacco fields ran green all the way to the ridge, when the kitchen smelled of good bread, and her mother's laughter carried through the house like something that would never end. She remembered her father walking the fence lines at dusk, hands in his pockets, satisfied in the way only a man who has built something real can be satisfied. That was before the debts. That was before Richard Whitmore came calling with his soft voice and his kind eyes and his offers that sounded like salvation and turned out to be chains. By the spring of 1816, the Bennet land was 3 seasons from gone. Her father, George Bennet, had aged 10 years in 2. Her younger brother, Daniel, had stopped sleeping. And Charlotte, the eldest daughter, the one who had always kept the books and known the difference between a good harvest and a disaster, had counted every option available to them and found only one that didn't end in ruin. She had agreed to marry Nathaniel Whitmore, not because she loved him. She had never spoken more than 6 words to him in her life, not because she believed he would be kind. Everything she had heard about the man suggested otherwise. She agreed because Richard Whitmore, Nathaniel's uncle and the architect of her family's downfall, had made the terms clear. The Bennet debts would be absorbed into the Whitmore estate. Her family would keep the house and a portion of the land. Her brother Daniel would have a future. All it required was Charlotte. She told herself it was a transaction. She told herself she was strong enough for transactions. She was almost right. Said. The ceremony was held at the Whitmore estate on the 2nd Saturday of June. It was the kind of morning Virginia does well, thick heat already building by 9. Honeysuckle climbing the porch railings, the mockingbirds loud and indifferent to human ceremony. The house itself was enormous, the kind of house that announces wealth before you're close enough to see the windows clearly. Charlotte arrived in her mother's dress, altered at the waist, the lace at the collar yellowed, but still beautiful. She carried no flowers. She had decided against them. She had seen Nathaniel Whitmore from a distance 3 times before this morning. Once at the county assembly, where he stood at the edge of the room and spoke to no one. Once on the road past her family's property, mounted on a gray horse, moving at a pace that suggested he had somewhere better to be. Once at the general store in Fredericksburg, where he had paid for his goods without looking at the man behind the counter. She had told herself those observations didn't constitute knowing a man. Standing beside him now at the front of the parlor, Charlotte revised her assessment. He was taller than she'd registered, broader at the shoulders. His face was the kind of face that had once been open. She thought she didn't know why she thought that, but she did, and had since been closed down and shuttered like a house the owner no longer wished to occupy. He did not look at her once during the ceremony, not when the minister spoke. Not when the vows were exchanged. Not when the ring, a plain gold band, no sentiment attached, was placed on her finger. She looked at him. She could not help it. She kept thinking, there is a human being inside this man. There has to be. He looked at the wall above the minister's head the entire time, as though the plaster held something more interesting than the woman he was marrying. She said, "I do," in a clear voice. His "I do" was barely audible. It was done in 11 minutes. The guests, and there were guests, a room full of Whitmore associates, county magistrates, landowners, whose presence signaled the social weight of the occasion, rather than any personal warmth, were served a meal that Charlotte did not eat. She sat at the long table and kept her face composed, and answered the questions put to her with the precision of someone who has decided that every word is a resource not to be wasted. "And where did you study, Mrs. Whitmore?" "At home, ma'am. My mother was thorough." "You must be so pleased to be mistress of such a fine estate." I hope to be useful here. And what are your thoughts on the new planting techniques Mr. Whitmore has introduced? Charlotte paused at that one. She looked at the woman who had asked it, the wife of a neighboring landowner, well-meaning but probing. I haven't yet had the opportunity to review the books, Charlotte said, but I look forward to it. She did not add, and I suspect I will have thoughts once I do. Across the table, she caught a flicker of something on Nathaniel's face. Not warmth, not recognition, just the briefest pause, as though a word had surprised him. Then it was gone. He looked away. The guests left by 4 in the afternoon. Richard Whitmore was the last to go. He was a large man, well-dressed, with a quality of deliberate friendliness that Charlotte had distrusted from their first meeting. He shook hands with Nathaniel, clapped him on the shoulder, and then turned to Charlotte with the warm smile of a man performing sincerity. "Welcome to the family, my dear," he said. "You'll find Whitmore Estate very agreeable, I'm sure. Nathaniel can be reserved, but he's a good man at heart. You'll bring out the best in him, I don't doubt it." Charlotte smiled back with the same quality of sincerity he was offering. "I'm sure we'll manage very well," she said. Richard's eyes held hers for just a moment longer than necessary. Then he patted her hand once proprietarily and left. She watched his carriage down the drive. Something is wrong with that man, she thought. She had thought it before. She thought it more clearly now. Nathaniel came to find her in the parlor when the house was quiet. She was standing at the window that overlooked the south field, watching the evening light move across the tobacco rows. She had taken off her gloves. She was thinking about irrigation. She heard him behind her before he spoke. The particular quality of his silence had a sound of its own, controlled, deliberate, the silence of a man who has decided exactly what he is about to say and is organizing it into its coldest possible configuration. "Mrs. Whitmore." She turned. He stood in the center of the room. His coat was still on. He had not loosened anything about himself since the ceremony. She had the sense that he never did, that the formality was not clothing, but structure, something he had built around himself so carefully that he no longer knew where it ended, and he began. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. He was quiet for a moment, not nervous quiet, assembling quiet. Then he said, "I want to be clear with you about what this arrangement is." "All right," she said. "This is a legal and financial agreement. It is not a marriage in any sense that would be," he paused, "personally meaningful. You will have your own rooms. You will have access to the household accounts for domestic purposes. You will be treated with the basic consideration owed to any resident of this property." Charlotte said nothing. She waited. He continued, "In return, I require very little of you. You will conduct yourself appropriately in public. You will not embarrass this household. You will not—" Another pause. Longer. Something moved through his face briefly and without his permission. "Make claims on my time or my attention." She held his gaze. She kept her voice very steady. "I understand," she said. "Good." He turned to go. And then, as though deciding that he had not yet made the wound clean enough, he turned back. "We will share a name," he said. "But nothing more. From this day forward you will not speak to me unless I have spoken to you first." The room was very quiet. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. She looked at him the way she had learned to look at difficult accounting, without flinching, without emotion, finding where the numbers actually lay. What she saw was not cruelty exactly. What she saw was a man who had been broken in some specific place and had sealed the fracture with ice and was now on his wedding day making absolutely certain no one would ever get close enough to break him again. She did not feel sorry for him. She did not have the luxury of feeling sorry for him. But she noted it. "As you wish, Mr. Whitmore," she said. She turned back to the window. She heard him leave. She stood at the window until the light was fully gone, and then she allowed herself very briefly to press her palm flat against the glass and feel how cool it was against her skin. All right, she thought. All right then. She did not cry. She had already made her peace with not crying. She was here. She was Whitmore's wife in name and contract. Her family's land was safe. Her brother had a future. Those were the facts that mattered. What she felt about the man who had just dismissed her on her wedding night. What small, sharp thing had lodged itself in her chest when he said never speak to me was a matter she would sort through later when she had more privacy and better light. She straightened her spine, picked up her gloves from the window ledge, and went to find her rooms. She was done being wounded by this day. She had work to do. Charlotte's rooms were on the east wing of the house, removed from Nathaniel's quarters in the west by 2 long corridors, and what felt like an entire philosophy of separation. They were not small rooms. They were not badly furnished. She suspected they had been prepared specifically for this purpose, a comfortable exile, pleasant enough to avoid reproach, distant enough to constitute a message. She unpacked her own trunk. She had instructed the housemaids that she would handle this herself because she was not yet ready to have strangers watching her face as she moved through the motions of settling into someone else's house. She had 3 dresses, 2 pairs of boots, her mother's Bible, which she kept not from faith but from sentiment, a leather-bound accounting ledger blank, which she had purchased in Fredericksburg on her last visit, and brought specifically because she intended to use it. She set the ledger on the desk by the window and sat down. She opened it to the first page. She wrote in her precise and economical hand at the top, Whitmore Estate. Household Accounts. Charlotte A. Whitmore. June 1816. Then she sat for a moment with the pen resting in her fingers and looked at what she had written. Her name. Her new name. She tested it in her mind the way you test a board for wrought careful pressure, listening for the give. Charlotte Whitmore. It didn't sound like her. It would take time. She closed the ledger, set the pen down, and went to bed in the cool, unfamiliar room with its unfamiliar smells and its unfamiliar sounds. And she stared at the ceiling and thought, this is your life now. Make it mean something. She fell asleep before she finished the thought because she had not slept well in 3 months, and her body had finally run out of dread and was simply tired. The first week passed, Charlotte observed. This was a habit she had cultivated since childhood, the habit of watching before acting, of learning a landscape before trying to move through it. Her mother had called it patience. Her father had called it stubbornness. Charlotte called it the only reliable tool she had. Whitmore Estate ran on a schedule that had clearly been set by Nathaniel's father and maintained through inertia since his death 4 years prior. The household staff was competent but underused. The kitchen was run efficiently by a woman named Mrs. Haley, who had worked for the Whitmore family for 20 years and wore her authority like a second skin. The stables were managed by an older man called Greer, who had opinions about horses that he expressed freely and about people that he kept to himself. Charlotte introduced herself to each of them in turn, not formally, not with the stiffness of a new mistress asserting authority. She came to the kitchen and asked Mrs. Haley what she needed, and listened to the answer, and nodded, and did not immediately offer solutions she hadn't been asked for. She went to the stables and asked Greer about the condition of the animals, and when he answered in the clipped way of a man who expects to be ignored, she asked a follow-up question that showed she had understood the first answer, and watched his posture change degree by degree. She went through the household accounts on the 3rd day. She had expected them to be orderly. Nathaniel Whitmore was a precise man, and precision tends to be systematic. She was right. The accounts were well kept, clear, detailed. But she had spent enough years managing a struggling household to read between the numbers, and what she found between these numbers was interesting. The estate was profitable, substantially so. But the margins in the southern fields were thinner than they should have been, given the acreage, and the labor costs had a quality of irregularity that she couldn't immediately explain. The numbers added up, but they added up in the way that numbers sometimes add up when someone has been careful to make them do so. She wrote 2 pages of notes and said nothing. She needed more information before she had conclusions. On the 5th day, she walked the eastern fence line of the property and found 3 sections that needed repair. She mentioned this to Greer, who confirmed it, but said the order for materials had been in with the supplier for 2 months, and nothing had come. Charlotte wrote down the supplier's name. On the 6th day, she visited the 3 tenant families in the eastern quarter. The Holloways, the Briggs family, and an older widow named Mrs. Pierce, who had lived on the edge of the property since before Nathaniel's father had owned it. She brought bread from Mrs. Haley's kitchen because she had nothing else to bring, and she sat in each house long enough to hear what was being said and what was being carefully not said. Mrs. Pierce was the most forthcoming. "You're not what I expected," the old woman said, looking Charlotte over with the directness of someone who had lived long enough not to waste time on politeness. "What did you expect?" Charlotte asked. "Someone softer, someone easier to manage." Charlotte looked at her steadily. "Do I need to be managed?" Mrs. Pierce made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Not by me, girl. I'm too old and too tired. But there are folks on this property and off it who are going to try. You'd do well to know that early." "Who?" Charlotte asked. The old woman was quiet for a moment. Her hands folded in her lap tightened almost imperceptibly. "You ask your husband's uncle what he paid for the grain contracts last season," she said finally. "And then you look at what the grain actually cost. See what number comes back to you." Charlotte kept her face neutral. "All right," she said. "And don't tell anyone I said that to you." "I won't." Charlotte paused. "Mrs. Pierce, my husband. Does he know this property? I mean, truly know it?" The old woman was quiet again. "Nathaniel Whitmore is a good man, caught in a bad pattern," she said at last. "His father was the same. Too proud to look close at what needed looking at. Too busy building the outside of things to notice what was happening on the inside." She studied Charlotte. "His father could have used a woman like you. Maybe Nathaniel can too, if he ever stops being a damn fool long enough to let you." Charlotte said nothing. She rode home from Mrs. Pierce's house with the afternoon sun hot on her back and a great deal to think about. She did not see Nathaniel at dinner. She rarely saw him at dinner. He ate in his study, or he didn't eat at all, and she sat at the long dining table with her notes spread beside her plate and worked through questions she was not yet ready to ask aloud. On the 9th day, she found him. She had not been looking for him exactly. She had been looking for the storage room in the east wing, where the estate's older records were kept, following Mrs. Haley's vague direction of down the hall, and then left again, and the door that sticks. She had found the door that stuck and pushed it open, and discovered unexpectedly that it was not a storage room at all. It was a smaller study, plainer than the one he worked from. No desk, just shelves and a single chair and a window with the curtain half drawn. And sitting in the chair with a ledger open on his knee, and his coat off for the first time she had ever seen, was Nathaniel Whitmore. He looked up. For a single unguarded moment, just one, she saw something in his face that had nothing to do with the man who had given her instructions on her wedding night. Something younger. Something that might, in different circumstances, have been startled and almost embarrassed at being caught in shirt sleeves in an unmapped room. Then it closed. "Mrs. Whitmore?" His voice was even. "Mr. Whitmore." She held up a hand. "I apologize. I was looking for the records room. Mrs. Haley's directions were imprecise. It's 2 doors further on." "Thank you." She turned to go. "What records are you looking for?" he asked. She stopped. She turned back. She weighed the question. He had not asked it in the way of a man making conversation. He had asked it in the way of a man who has registered information and is processing it. "I'm trying to understand the grain contracts," she said. "The numbers in the household accounts don't match what I'd expect, given the yield records from the last 3 years. I'd like to see the original contracts before I form any conclusions." He was very still. "You've been reviewing the accounts," he said. "Yes." "I didn't ask you to review the accounts." Charlotte held his gaze. "No," she said. "You didn't. But the accounts are part of the household, and you told me I would have access to the household for domestic purposes." She paused deliberately. "I'm being thorough." He studied her for a moment. She did not fill the silence. "The contracts are in the records room," he said finally. "The folders are labeled by year. The grain contracts are in the agricultural section." "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore." She left. In the corridor, walking to the records room, 2 doors further on, she allowed herself precisely 3 seconds of something that was not quite satisfaction, but was related to it. He had answered her. She had not asked in a way he could object to, and he had answered her. It was a very small thing. It was also she was beginning to understand, not nothing. She found the grain contracts. She found also something she had not expected to find: a second set of records. They were not hidden exactly. They were filed in the wrong year's folder. The 1813 folder, rather than the 1814 folder, in a way that might have been a clerical error, and might have been something else. Charlotte had only found them because she was the kind of person who opened every folder rather than the one she was looking for. She sat at the small table in the records room for a long time after she found them. The numbers told a story. It was not a complicated story in the way that fraud is rarely complicated once you understand the basic shape of it. What makes fraud work is not complexity, but confidence. The confidence of the person executing it, that no one will look closely enough to notice. Someone had been paying a premium for grain from a specific supplier since 1813. The premium was small enough per contract to be unremarkable. Across 3 years, it had accumulated into a substantial sum. The supplier's name on the contracts was a company Charlotte didn't recognize. The name of the man who had negotiated and signed those contracts on behalf of the Whitmore estate was Richard Whitmore. Charlotte closed the folders. She sat very still. She thought about what Mrs. Pierce had told her. She thought about the grain contracts. She thought about the fence line that had been waiting 2 months for materials. She thought about the tenant families in the Eastern Quarter and the quality of careful not saying she had encountered in their houses. She thought about Richard Whitmore's hand patting hers on her wedding day. "Welcome to the family, my dear." She thought about what kind of man arranges for his nephew to marry a woman whose family he has just spent 3 years bankrupting. She opened her ledger. She began to write. 3 weeks into her residence at Whitmore Estate, something shifted. It did not shift dramatically. It shifted the way things shift in real life gradually, then more noticeably in the way that water finds its level. The household staff stopped treating her with the careful neutrality of people waiting to see what kind of mistress she would turn out to be. Mrs. Haley began consulting her in the mornings with a directness that implied respect. Greer stopped shortening his answers. 2 of the housemaids began bringing her small things, a question about mending a problem with the root cellar, with the ease of people who have decided they can. The tenant families began to see her on the property more regularly. She was not inspecting, she was not managing. She was simply present, walking the fence lines, checking on the kitchen gardens, asking questions and listening to answers. She had also quietly sent a letter to Fredericksburg. She knew a man there, an attorney named James Colby, who had handled some legal matters for her father before the debt crisis, and who she trusted for his precision and his discretion. She had not told him everything. She had told him enough. "I have found some financial irregularities in a set of contracts for a property with which I am now associated. I would appreciate your assessment of whether these irregularities fall within the category of standard business error or something more serious. I am enclosing copies of the relevant documents. Please direct your reply to my personal attention, and please consider this inquiry confidential." She had made the copies herself late at night in the records room by lamplight, working in the careful silence of a woman who understands that what she is doing is significant and that she cannot afford to be wrong. She did not tell Nathaniel. She was not ready to tell Nathaniel. She did not know yet whether he knew. She did not know whether his coldness toward her was the coldness of a man who had been genuinely deceived by his uncle and was simply additionally a hard and closed-off person, or whether there was something more complicated at work. She needed more information. She was patient. The first time Nathaniel spoke to her of his own accord, it was about the horses. She had been in the stables. She went to the stables most mornings, because the quality of a working farm could often be read in the condition of its animals, and because she liked horses in the straightforward way, of someone who has always found them more reliable than people. She was talking to Greer about the mare in the third stall, who had been favoring her left front leg for a week, and whose recovery Greer was managing with the attention of someone who took such things personally. Nathaniel appeared in the stable doorway. She registered him without turning. She had developed a slight awareness of his presence on the property, not the anxious kind, not the kind born of worry or submission, but the matter-of-fact kind that comes from sharing a space with someone, and learning the patterns of where they are and when. Greer straightened slightly. Charlotte did not. She finished her question to Greer. "And the swelling has gone down since Monday," and waited for his answer before she acknowledged Nathaniel. "Somewhat, Mrs. Whitmore. I'd say another week before she's right. Keep the cold compress on it in the evenings. I'll bring some of the willow bark preparation Mrs. Pierce gave me. She swears by it for soft tissue." "Yes, ma'am." She turned. Nathaniel was watching her, not with the careful blankness he usually wore, with something that was one notch closer to attention. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. "Mrs. Whitmore." He moved into the stable unhurried, going toward the gray in the second stall, his horse she had gathered. "What's wrong with the mare?" "Soft tissue in the left front. Nothing serious. Greer's been managing it." He looked at the mare. He looked at it with the eyes of someone who knows horses. "Overworked?" he asked. "Possibly. Or a misplaced step in the backfield. Greer thinks she came down wrong on the uneven ground by the east fence." She paused. "Which reminds me. The east fence has 3 sections in poor repair. The materials order has apparently been with the supplier for 2 months." There was a silence. "I'll look into it," he said. "I've already noted the supplier's name and the date of the original order," she said. "In case it's useful." Another silence. She did not fill it. "Thank you," he said. The words came out carefully, as though they had been examined before release. "Of course," she said. She went back to the mare. After a moment, she heard him moving behind her toward his gray, and the quiet, specific sounds of a man settling a saddle, and then the particular silence of someone who is still in a space but has shifted from watching to doing. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. She turned. He was not looking at her. He was adjusting the stirrup. His hands were competent and automatic on the leather. "The willow bark preparation does it work." She felt something very small and careful move in her chest. "It has worked for everything I've used it on," she said. "Mrs. Pierce has 60 years of experience. I trust it more than what the apothecary in town sells." He was quiet for another moment. "All right," he said. "Use it." He led the gray out past her, and she stepped back, and for just a moment, just a fraction of one, their eyes met in the middle of the stable, where the morning light came in sideways, and neither of them was maintaining a particular expression. Then he was past her and out. She turned back to the mare. She kept her face entirely to herself, but something had begun. She could feel it the way you feel a change in weather before the sky shows it, not in the large and obvious registers, but in the small adjusting ones. In the shift of air pressure, in the quality of the silence left behind him. Something had begun, whether he intended it or not, whether she was ready for it or not. The letter from James Colby arrived on the first day of July. Charlotte read it twice in the records room with the door closed, her hand very steady on the paper. Colby had done what she'd asked. He was thorough, and he was precise, and what he had found confirmed what she had suspected, and went considerably further than she had anticipated. The company named on the grain contracts, Crawford & Sons Supply, was not a legitimate trading company. It was a holding entity incorporated in Richmond, with one named principal, a man called Edmund Graves. Edmund Graves, Colby noted, had been employed as an agent for several business ventures. all of them connected by their distance from the men who actually profited from them. Colby had not been able to establish who ultimately owned Crawford & Sons Supply, but he had found in the public records available to him that Edmund Graves had been named as an agent in 2 other financial arrangements, both of which had involved the transfer of land or capital in ways that had ended badly for one party and very well for another. He listed the names of the parties who had fared badly. One of them was a family Charlotte recognized, the Harrisons of Caroline County, a landowning family who had run into financial difficulties beginning in 1812 and whose property had been acquired at what the public record suggested was substantially below market value by an unnamed buyer. She did not know who had bought the Harrison land. She did know who had been active in Caroline County in 1812. She sat with the letter for a long time. Then she opened her ledger and wrote 4 careful pages of notes. Then she sat back in the chair and looked at the ceiling and thought, how far does this go? And how much does Nathaniel know? She did not have answers yet, but she was beginning to have the shape of questions, which was the first step toward answers. She thought about her father, who had trusted Richard Whitmore's friendship and his financial guidance, and had ended up 3 seasons from losing everything. She thought about Mrs. Pierce, who had said, ask your husband's uncle what he paid for the grain contracts. She thought about Nathaniel Whitmore, sitting in his small plain study in shirt sleeves with a ledger on his knee and something younger in his face for just 1 second before he closed it down. She thought, this man may be as much a victim of his uncle as my family is. She thought, or he may not be. She thought, I need to know which before I do anything with what I've found. She closed the ledger. She put Colby's letter in the hidden pocket of her traveling case, which she kept locked. She went to dinner. That evening, for the first time since her wedding day, Nathaniel Whitmore sat at the dining table. He did not explain his presence. He simply sat at the far end of the table and ate in silence. And she sat at her end of the table and ate in silence, and between them the candles threw light on the distance. But he was there, and she noted it. And she thought, all right, we begin somewhere. This is somewhere. She refilled her water glass and said nothing, and ate her dinner and let the silence sit between them without treating it as something that needed to be fixed. Some things she had learned could not be hurried. She would wait. She would watch. She would build her case from the ground up, the way she had built everything in her life, slowly, carefully, and with the patience of someone who has never had the luxury of being wrong. The candles burned down. Outside, the Virginia summer pressed hot and fragrant against the windows. Somewhere down the drive, a nightbird was calling. Charlotte Whitmore sat in the house that was not hers, and wore the name that was not yet hers, and carried in her locked case the first evidence of a wrong so large it might take everything she had to unravel it. She was not afraid. She was, in fact, for the first time in a very long time, precisely where she needed to be. 3 weeks into her marriage, Charlotte Whitmore had established 3 things with certainty. First, Nathaniel Whitmore was not a lazy man. He was up before the household most mornings, out on the property by 6, working with a focus that had the quality of a man outrunning something rather than pursuing it. She didn't know yet what he was outrunning. She intended to find out. Second, the eastern quarter of this estate had been systematically neglected in ways that were too consistent to be accidental. Fence sections unrepaired. Irrigation channels that hadn't been cleared in 2 seasons. Tenant homes where the roofing had gone soft and no one had come to fix it. She had begun making a list. It was a long list. Third, Richard Whitmore visited the estate more than any uncle had reason to. He had been twice in the 3 weeks since the wedding, each time with the same quality of warmth that Charlotte had identified on her wedding day as performance rather than feeling. He brought gifts, a bottle of wine, a set of books he said he thought she might enjoy. He sat with Nathaniel in the front study for hours, and when he left, he always found a way to pass through whatever room Charlotte happened to be occupying just to say goodbye, just to see what she was doing. She noticed that too. The 4th week of July brought a heat wave that settled over Virginia like something with intention. The tobacco fields shimmered in the afternoons. The work slowed. Charlotte moved through the household with the deliberate efficiency of someone who has decided that conditions are irrelevant to the work that needs doing. She had begun very quietly to change things. Not the large things, not yet. She understood that a woman who arrives in a house and immediately restructures it invites resistance. So she started with the small things, the kind of adjustments that one by one looked like common sense rather than authority, but that accumulated over weeks amounted to something. She reorganized the kitchen storage so that the most used goods were most accessible, which cut 40 minutes from Mrs. Haley's morning prep. She identified which of the household suppliers were overcharging for standard goods and suggested alternatives carefully as questions rather than directives. She had a conversation with Greer about the mare's recovery that turned without her engineering it into a longer conversation about the overall condition of the working animals and what they needed. And then she went to the household accounts and found the money for what they needed, and she did it without asking Nathaniel's permission, because she had the authority, and because she was not in the habit of asking permission for things she was already entitled to do. She found the money because she had found in her review of the household accounts a pattern of small redundancies. Duplicate orders. Services being paid for that were no longer being provided, a subscription to a Richmond newspaper that had been renewed annually for 4 years, for a man who had been dead for 3. She cut the redundancies. She redirected the savings. And then one morning, she rode out to the Holloway family's house in the Eastern Quarter with Greer and 2 of the estate's laborers and a load of roofing material. And she spent the better part of the day helping fix a roof that had been leaking since the previous winter. She did not ask Nathaniel about this either. She knew he would hear about it. That was in fact the point. He heard about it from Greer, she later gathered. Greer, who was not a man given to extensive reporting, apparently provided enough detail that Nathaniel stood in the stable for several minutes, saying nothing, before he went back to his study. She knew this because Mrs. Haley told her with the suppressed satisfaction of a woman who has been waiting a long time to see something change around here. On the last Wednesday of July, Charlotte made an error in judgment. She had been corresponding with James Colby in Fredericksburg, sending her letters through the post in town rather than through the estate's regular messenger. This was deliberate. She wasn't ready for her correspondence to be visible. But on the Wednesday, she came back from town to find Richard Whitmore in the front parlor, arrived unexpectedly sitting with a glass of the estate's whiskey in his hand and a question on his face. "My dear Charlotte," he said, standing with the reflexive courtesy of a man who has learned that manners are a form of camouflage. "You've been in town?" "Yes," she said. She set her hat on the side table. She kept her traveling case under her arm. "On estate business." His tone was light. His eyes were not. "Household needs," she said. "Nothing significant." He smiled. "Of course. You've been so diligent about the household. Nathaniel mentioned it." This was the first she'd heard of Nathaniel mentioning anything to his uncle about her, and the information lodged itself in her mind with a small, sharp attention. "Has he?" she said pleasantly. "He's noticed your initiative," Richard said. "He doesn't always say so directly, but he notices things." He tilted his head. "You're a remarkable young woman, Charlotte. I said so when I first suggested the match, and I say it now." She looked at him. He had just told her without intending to that the marriage had been his idea, not a mutual arrangement, not a business decision of Nathaniel's, his. "You're too kind," she said. "I'm merely observant." He watched her the way he always watched her, with a warmth that had a floor under it. "What's in the case?" "Personal correspondence," she said. "Letters to my family." She kept her voice pleasant, her posture easy, the case under her arm as though it were nothing, because the case with Colby's letters inside was everything. Richard nodded. "Of course. How is your family? Your father managing?" "Well enough," she said. "Thank you for asking." She excused herself to change from the heat of the ride, and she went upstairs and locked the case in her room and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment with her hands in her lap. He had asked about the case, casually, but he had asked. She needed to be more careful. She needed to be considerably more careful. Nathaniel found her in the records room that evening. She had made it a habit to work there in the late afternoon, when the light through the single window was good and the house was quieter. She heard him in the corridor and did not look up from the ledger she was working from. He appeared in the doorway. "My uncle was here," he said. "I know," she said. "I saw him." He was quiet for a moment. She continued writing. "He said you'd been in town." "I had. On household business." She set the pen down and looked at him. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, not aggressively, but in the way of a man who is containing something. "Yes," she said. "I needed to check on some of the supplier accounts in person. The written correspondence wasn't giving me complete information." It was true. It was also not the complete truth. He studied her. "Which suppliers?" he asked. She told him 2 of the names, both of them legitimate, both of them things she had actually done while in town. He nodded slowly. Then, the Holloway roof. She waited. "Greer told me," he said. "You took materials from the estate and labor from the property and spent a day fixing a tenant's roof." "The roof was leaking," she said. "It had been leaking since March. Mrs. Holloway has a child under 2 years old." "I'm aware of that." "Then you're aware it needed doing." A silence. "I don't recall authorizing that expenditure," he said. Charlotte looked at him for a moment. Then she opened the ledger and turned it toward him, showing him the page she'd been working on. "The cost came from the savings I identified in the household accounts last month. The duplicate orders, the discontinued services, the newspaper subscription. I can itemize it if you'd like. Every dollar is accounted for." He looked at the ledger. She watched his face move through something she couldn't fully read. Not anger exactly. Something more complicated. "You saved money in the household accounts," he said. "Yes." "And then you used those savings to fix the Holloway roof." "Yes." He straightened. He uncrossed his arms. "The fence section's in the east quarter," he said. "I've ordered the repair. The materials will arrive this week." She had not asked him about this. She had mentioned it once, and then she had waited. "Thank you," she said. He turned to go, then stopped. "The Briggs family," he said. "In the eastern quarter." "I know them," she said carefully. "Their irrigation channel has been blocked for 2 seasons. I want it cleared before harvest." He paused. "Can you manage that from the household budget, or does it need to come from the farm accounts?" She kept her face level. He was asking her to help solve a problem on his estate. He was asking her in the oblique language of a man who cannot quite bring himself to acknowledge that he is asking, but he was asking. "Let me look at both accounts," she said. "I'll give you an answer by Friday." "Good," he said. He left. She sat with the ledger for a long moment after he was gone. Then she wrote down the exchange word by word in the small private section at the back of the ledger that she kept for observations rather than numbers. He noticed she wrote, "He is watching what I do, and he is degree by degree incorporating what I do into how this estate runs. He has not acknowledged this. He may not know he is doing it, but he is doing it." She closed the ledger. She sat for another moment very still, thinking about Richard Whitmore's eyes on her traveling case. Then she wrote one more line. "Be careful. Whatever is happening here, be careful." The first real break came on a Thursday morning in early August, when a letter arrived addressed to her that was not from James Colby. It was from Thomas Caldwell. She hadn't expected to hear from Thomas. She had known him since childhood. They had grown up neighboring properties, she and Thomas and his sister Mary. And he had been one of those particular friends that girls have in girlhood who feel permanent until life intervenes and they simply aren't anymore. He had gone into the army in 1812, the war with the British, and she had heard from him twice in 4 years. The letter was brief. He was in Richmond. He had heard about her marriage. He didn't say how, but Thomas always had the ability to hear about things. He wanted her to know that he was well and that he hoped she was settled. And then, at the bottom of the letter, in his particular dense handwriting, "I've come across something in the course of my work here that may be pertinent to your family's situation. I don't want to commit it to a letter. Is there a way for us to meet without inconvenience? Charlotte read the letter 3 times. Then she burned it in the fireplace in her room because she trusted Thomas Caldwell, but she did not trust the mail. She wrote back through a friend in Fredericksburg, Mary Aldrich, who had no idea what she was forwarding, or why, only that Charlotte needed a discreet address for certain correspondence, and told Thomas she would find a way to meet him in Fredericksburg before the end of August. She did not tell Nathaniel about this correspondence. She told herself she would explain everything when she had enough to explain. She told herself that was the practical choice because it was. But she was also honest enough in the privacy of her own thinking to recognize that she didn't know yet whose side Nathaniel was on. And until she did, she was playing this alone. What she could not have anticipated was that the middle of August would change something between her and Nathaniel, and it would change it entirely without her engineering it. It started at breakfast. She had come down early. She always came down early and found Mrs. Haley agitated, in a way she had not seen before, moving through the kitchen with the clipped efficiency of someone managing distress through motion. "What's happened?" Charlotte asked. "Young Briggs boy," Mrs. Haley said. "Tommy Briggs, 8 years old. He fell in the creek last night trying to retrieve a fishing line, and he's running a fever this morning, and his mother's half out of her mind, and there's no doctor closer than Fredericksburg." Charlotte was already moving. "Get me the medicine chest. I'll go now. You know fever medicine? I know what my mother taught me, and my mother buried exactly no one to a fever she caught early enough." Charlotte stopped. "Where's Mr. Whitmore?" "Out on the east field. Send someone to tell him what's happened. Tell him I've gone to the Briggs property." She did not wait for acknowledgement. She knew she might be overstepping. She knew that arriving at a tenant family's home without the estate's formal involvement might create complications she hadn't anticipated. She went anyway because there was a sick child, and the alternative was to wait for permission she hadn't been denied yet. She spent 3 hours at the Briggs house. The boy's fever was high, but not yet dangerous. She knew the difference. Her mother had been careful to teach her the difference. She brought it down with cold compresses and the willow bark preparation Mrs. Pierce had given her, and the particular confidence of someone who does not let sick children see uncertainty on her face. The boy's mother, Sarah Briggs, held it together until the fever broke, and then sat down at her kitchen table and pressed her hands to her face and made a sound that wasn't quite crying, but was adjacent to it. "He's going to be fine," Charlotte said. She sat down across from her. "The fever's broken. Keep the compresses going through the night. Give him water every hour if he'll take it." Sarah Briggs lowered her hands. Her face was blotched and exhausted and grateful in the way that is almost too large to look at directly. "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't know how to—" "You don't need to," Charlotte said. "Is there someone who can stay with you tonight?" "My sister-in-law." "Send for her." "Yes, ma'am." Charlotte stood. In the doorway, Sarah Briggs caught her arm. "Mrs. Whitmore." Her voice was low. "There are folks on this property who've been wondering about you. What kind of woman you'd be. Whether you'd be like—" She stopped. "Whether you'd be the kind of person to actually come." Charlotte looked at her for a moment. "I came," she said simply. She walked out. Nathaniel was standing in the yard outside. She had not heard him arrive. He was standing with his horse, and he had clearly ridden hard. The gray's neck was damp, and he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen from him before. It was not the closed-down expression. It was not the managed blankness. It was something much less organized than that, and he seemed to know it because he looked away almost as soon as she registered it. "I got the message," he said. "How is he?" "Better. The fever broke." She walked past him toward her own horse. "He'll need watching tonight, but he'll be fine." "Sarah Briggs, is she all right?" Charlotte paused. She turned back. She had not expected the question. Not because he lacked the capacity for it, but because he had spent 6 weeks making it very clear that he did not initiate this kind of exchange. "She will be," she said. "She's frightened. It's her child." He was quiet for a moment. He stroked the gray's neck with the absent attention of a man whose hands need something to do while his mind does something else. "My mother," he said, and then stopped. She waited. "When I was 7, he said. Fever. 4 days. I don't remember most of it. He was still looking at the horse. I remember her face, the whole time. Charlotte said nothing. What you did today, he said. He was still not looking at her. It was. He stopped again. Then, it was right. It was, she thought, possibly the most significant thing he had said to her. Not because it was elaborate, because it cost him something. I know, she said gently and without arrogance. That's why I went. She mounted her horse and rode back to the estate, and she was very careful to keep her face arranged in its usual composure, and she thought about his voice when he said, I remember her face the whole time, and she thought, there is a man in there. There is absolutely a man in there, and whatever locked him away from people is going to have to be reckoned with eventually. But not today. Today she had done what needed doing, and that was enough. The reckoning, the first one, came 4 days later. It came in the form of a dinner invitation from the county magistrate, a man named Hargrove, who had been Nathaniel's father's closest associate, and whose opinion Charlotte had gathered from various conversations carried significant social weight in the region. The invitation was to a formal dinner at Hargrove House in honor of a visiting official from Richmond. Nathaniel told her about it in the corridor briefly, in the way that he told her things he considered logistics. It will be expected that we attend together, he said. I understand, she said. There will be questions. He paused. People are curious about you. About whether I'm suitable, she said. He looked at her directly for just a moment. Yes. I'll be ready, she said. She was. She wore the blue dress she had brought from her father's house. Not the wedding dress, but the good one. The one her mother had made from fabric she'd saved for years. She had her hair done simply because she did not have the money for complication, and also because she had learned that simplicity worn with complete confidence was indistinguishable from elegance. Nathaniel met her at the bottom of the stairs. He was in his formal coat. He looked, as he always looked in formal settings, like a man who belongs in rooms like this. She had been raised in rooms like this before her family's fall, and she moved through them with the comfortable authority of old familiarity rather than new money's anxiety. He offered his arm. She took it. In the carriage they said nothing. The silence had a different quality than usual, not hostile, not managed, but something closer to neutral. Two people who were beginning to understand that they were navigating something together, even if they hadn't yet agreed on the destination. Hargrove House was lit from every window. The guests were the county's established families, landowners, merchants. Two men, Charlotte recognized as local magistrates. The visiting official from Richmond was a man named Alderton with a quality of careful observation that she read immediately as significant. Men who visited from Richmond and observed carefully were men who had been sent to find something. She filed this away. The dinner proceeded. She sat 3 seats from Nathaniel at the long table and answered questions with the precision she had developed over 6 weeks of practice. Where had she been educated? What were her interests? How did she find the Whitmore estate? The questions were polite and probing in the particular way of people who have already formed opinions and are testing them. She found Nathaniel watching her from his end of the table. Not always. Not obviously. But he was watching. She answered a question about the estate's agricultural approach. One of the magistrates had asked clearly, expecting a generality with 3 minutes of specific, accurate substantive commentary on the tobacco yields in the southern fields versus the wheat rotation in the north. The relationship between soil preparation and harvest quality, and her thoughts on what the estate might improve. The magistrate stared at her when she finished. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, you know your land. I know my husband's land, she said. I'm learning it. She did not look at Nathaniel, but she felt him look at her. Afterward, when the dinner had ended and they were in the carriage going home through the dark of the Virginia road, he said, Where did you learn the soil rotation methodology? My father, she said. Before the debts, he ran a working estate. He taught me the same things he'd have taught a son. Silence. The magistrate looked as though he'd been told Christmas had been rescheduled, Nathaniel said. It was, She paused. It was the first thing he had said to her that was close to dry. Close to the ghost of humor. She kept her voice even. "He did," she said. "You did that deliberately," he said. "I answered the question he asked," she said. He was quiet. "Yes," he said. "You did." The carriage moved through the dark. The horse's hooves were steady on the road. Somewhere in the distance, a summer storm was building. She could smell it, the particular metallic smell of rain coming from the west. "The man from Richmond," she said carefully. "Alderton. What about him? What was he there to find out?" A pause. "What makes you think he was there to find anything?" Nathaniel said. "The way he listened," she said. "He asked 3 questions all night and listened very carefully to everything around the answers. Men who do that professionally are usually sent somewhere for a reason." Another pause. Longer. "He's looking into some land transfers in the county," Nathaniel said. His voice was measured. "From the past several years, there's been a concern raised in Richmond about whether some of the transfers were conducted appropriately." Charlotte sat very still. Land transfers in this county. From the past several years. "I see," she said. She said nothing else. She thought Colby. "I need to write to Colby tomorrow, and I need to see Thomas before the end of the month." She thought the man from Richmond is here because someone in Richmond already knows something. That means whatever Richard Whitmore has been doing is large enough to have made a sound. She thought, and Nathaniel doesn't know yet what it is that Alderton is actually looking for. She thought, or does he? That last thought sat cold and specific in her chest the rest of the ride home. She did not sleep well that night. The next morning, she rode to Mrs. Pierce's house before breakfast. The old woman was on her porch when Charlotte arrived, as she usually was, with coffee and the particular stillness of someone who has nowhere to be and knows it. "You look like you haven't slept," Mrs. Pierce said. "I haven't," Charlotte said. She dismounted and tied her horse and went up the porch steps and sat in the second chair without being invited because she was past asking permission for things at this point. "Tell me what you know about Richard Whitmore and the land transfers." Mrs. Pierce looked at her for a long moment. "You found the contracts," she said. "Some time ago," Charlotte said. "I've been corresponding with an attorney in Fredericksburg, and last night the dinner at Hargrove House included a man from Richmond who's looking into county land transfers." The old woman set her coffee down. "Your family wasn't the first," she said. "I know. The Harrisons of Caroline County. And the Wentworths. Before that." She looked out at the road. Richard Whitmore has been doing this for 15 years. Finding families who are overextended, offering help that looks like help and isn't maneuvering them into positions where they have to sell or transfer land at below value. Sometimes marrying someone into the family to secure the arrangement. She paused. "Your marriage wasn't coincidence, girl." "I know," Charlotte said. "The question," Mrs. Pierce said slowly, "is whether Nathaniel knows." "Yes," Charlotte said. "That is the question. I've lived on this property since his father's time," the old woman said. "Nathaniel Whitmore is many things. Some of them not good, but he's not a man who would willingly be party to what his uncle does. He's too proud for it." She looked at Charlotte. "Too proud, and there's something in him that still has a conscience, even if he's buried it under all that ice he lives in." Charlotte said nothing. "That doesn't mean he's going to thank you when he finds out," Mrs. Pierce said. "Men who find out they've been used by people they trusted, they don't always aim their anger at the right person first." "I know that too," Charlotte said quietly. "You ready for that?" Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said. "But I'll manage." The old woman looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up her coffee. "You remind me of his mother," she said. "That's a compliment. She was the best thing that ever happened to this place." A pause. "She also had a very hard time of it." Charlotte stood. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it." She rode back to the estate with her spine straight and her face forward and her mind moving fast through everything she knew. everything she still needed to know, and the growing understanding that she was not going to be able to stay quiet much longer. The man from Richmond had changed the timeline. Whatever was coming, it was coming faster now, and when it came, she intended to be ready. She found Nathaniel at the fence line in the east quarter that afternoon. The repair crew was finishing the last section, and he was there watching with his coat off and his sleeves rolled, and the look of a man doing the kind of work he actually understands. She walked up beside him. He glanced at her, said nothing. She watched the workers for a moment. Then she said, "Alderton, the man from Richmond. He's been back in the county." Nathaniel was still. "What do you know about that?" he said. His voice was careful. "I heard it in town this morning." She had. "He's been asking about property records, specifically the acquisitions going back to 1813. Nathaniel said nothing. She waited. She had gotten good at waiting. "I've been asked to meet with him," he said finally. "Next week." She turned to look at him. His profile was sharp against the afternoon sky, jaw set, the particular stillness of a man who is managing something large. "Do you know what he wants to ask you?" she said. A long pause. "I have some ideas," he said. She held very still and thought, he knows something. He knows more than he said. And whatever it is, it's eating him. She said Nathaniel, his first name. She had never used it before, and they both heard it land. He turned to look at her. "If there are things about this estate's accounts, about arrangements that have been made that don't look right," she said, "you should have someone you trust looking at them before that meeting. A lawyer, someone who can help you understand what you're dealing with." He was very still. His eyes were doing something complicated. "And why?" he said very quietly. "Would you say that to me?" She looked at him steadily. "Because I think someone has been using this estate," she said. "And I think you may not know the full extent of it. And I think that when Alderton sits across a table from you, you should not be surprised by what he puts in front of you." The silence was enormous. She held his gaze. He said slowly, "What do you know Charlotte? Her name, her given name. First time." She thought, "Not yet. I don't have enough. Thomas hasn't come. Colby hasn't confirmed the chain back to Richard. If I tell him now and I'm wrong about any piece of it, he closes down again and I lose any chance of getting to the truth together. Less than I need to know," she said honestly. "But I'm working on it." She paused. "Trust me a little longer." He looked at her for a long time. The workers had finished. The fence line was clean. The sun was going down behind the ridge, and the light had the thick gold quality of late August, the kind of light that makes everything look like a memory of itself. "Why should I trust you?" he asked. Not hostile, genuine, as though the answer mattered to him. She didn't look away. "Because I fixed the Holloway roof," she said. "Because I went to the Briggs boy when he was sick. Because I have been on this property for 2 months, and in those 2 months I have done nothing that was not in the interest of it and the people on it." She paused. "Because I have no reason to deceive you, and you know it." His jaw worked. He looked away. "All right," he said, low and rough and not easy for him. "All right." He walked back toward the house. She stood at the fence line in the late summer light and watched him go and thought something just changed. Something real just changed. And she thought, "I hope I'm not too late. I hope whatever Thomas has found and whatever Colby can confirm, I hope there's enough to build on. Because the man from Richmond is already here, and the clock is running, and I am almost out of time to do this quietly." She turned and walked after him. The fence line was fixed behind her. Everything else still had a long way to go. Thomas Caldwell arrived in Fredericksburg on the 22nd of August, and Charlotte knew the moment she saw his face that whatever he had found was worse than she had anticipated. She had ridden to Fredericksburg alone, telling Mrs. Haley she had business at the dry goods supplier and would be back before supper. It was not a lie. She did have business at the supplier. She simply had other business first. Thomas was waiting at Mary Aldrich's house, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched, and when Charlotte came through the door, he stood up and she saw it immediately, the particular tightness around his eyes that she recognized from childhood as the look he got when he was carrying something heavy and had been carrying it alone too long. "Tom," she said. Charlotte. He crossed to her and took both her hands briefly in the grip of an old friend, the kind of greeting that contains years of shared history in 3 seconds. Then he stepped back and looked at her carefully. "You look well. Considering." "Considering what?" "Considering what I'm about to tell you." She sat down. He sat across from her. He pulled a leather satchel from beside the chair and set it on the table between them, and the sound it made, the heavy, deliberate sound of something substantial, made her stomach tighten. "Start from the beginning," she said. He did. Thomas had come back from the war in 1815 with the particular restlessness of men who have seen too much and come home to find the world has reorganized itself without consulting them. He had taken work in Richmond with a trading company, partly because it paid, and partly because it kept him moving. In the course of that work, he had encountered in the records of a mercantile dispute the name Crawford and Sons Supply. He hadn't recognized it at first. It was only when the dispute led him to pull the company's filing records that he found the name Edmund Graves, and Edmund Graves led him through 3 weeks of careful record pulling to Richard Whitmore. Richard Whitmore, Thomas said, has been running the same scheme in this county for 15 years. He identifies families with land that has strategic value, either for agriculture or for what's coming. "What's coming?" Charlotte asked. "Roads," Thomas said. "The new federal road planning. There's been talk in Richmond for 2 years about expanding the road network south through Virginia. The routes aren't public yet, but they will be, and the land those roads will cross is worth 3-4 times its current value to the people who own it when the announcement comes." He looked at her steadily. "Your family's land is on one of the projected routes, Charlotte." She was very still. "My family's land," she said, "and 6 other properties in this county that Richard Whitmore now controls directly or through intermediaries. He's been buying low for 15 years, bankrupting families who won't sell willingly, using legal arrangements to transfer title in ways that look legitimate." He paused. "Your marriage to Nathaniel was the last piece. The Bennett land transfers fully to Whitmore Estate on your father's death per the debt settlement agreement your father signed. And Whitmore Estate is controlled by Richard," Charlotte said. "Not legally, but effectively. I found 3 separate financial arrangements in which Nathaniel's decisions, major ones, land purchases, capital investments, were predated by Richard's financial positioning in ways that suggest he knew what Nathaniel would decide before Nathaniel decided it." Thomas paused. "Either Nathaniel is complicit." "He's not," Charlotte said. Thomas looked at her. "I've been living in that house for 2 months, she said. Her voice was flat and certain. "He's not complicit. He doesn't know." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Charlotte," he said carefully, "the arrangement your father signed, it was Richard who brought it to him. And it was Richard who suggested the marriage to Nathaniel as part of the settlement. I have a letter," he reached into the satchel, "that Richard wrote to a man named Graves in March of this year before your wedding. He describes the arrangement as his phrase, the cleanest solution yet. The nephew does the marrying and the acquiring without knowing he's doing either." Charlotte took the letter. She read it. Her hands were steady. Her face was steady. Inside, something was very quiet and very cold and very focused, the way things get when you are past the stage of shock and into the stage of reckoning. "I need copies of everything," she said. "I made them," he said. He opened the satchel fully. All of it. She looked at the documents spread on the table before her. 15 years of careful fraud. Her family's ruin documented. Nathaniel's manipulation documented. The letter in Richard Whitmore's own hand that made his nephew sound like a useful instrument rather than a human being. She thought about Nathaniel at the fence line. "Trust me a little longer." She thought I should have moved faster. She thought, no, I needed this. I needed all of it before I could move at all. "The man from Richmond," she said. "Alderton. He's been in the county asking about land transfers." Thomas nodded. I know about Alderton. He was sent by the Federal Land Office. They've been tracking the Crawford and Sons payments for 8 months. They're close, Charlotte, but they don't have the full chain yet. They don't have the letter connecting Richard to Graves directly. He looked at her. What you have in this satchel is what they're missing. She looked at him. Then we need to get this to Alderton, she said. That's why I came, he said. She rode back to the estate with the satchel hidden under her traveling cloak and her mind working at a pace that had no room in it for anything except the problem in front of her. She had perhaps a week before Nathaniel's meeting with Alderton. She needed to decide before that meeting whether to go to Alderton directly or to go to Nathaniel first. The case for going to Alderton directly, it was faster. It removed the variable of Nathaniel's reaction, and it guaranteed the information reached the right authority without being filtered through a man who might, whatever she believed about him, make complicated choices when his uncle's name was on the documents. The case for going to Nathaniel first he deserved to know. He had been used in this scheme as thoroughly as her family had been, and whatever mistakes he had made, whatever coldness he had wrapped himself in, whatever damage he had done in the name of his own protection, he had not done this. Someone had done this to him, and a man who finds out he's been defrauded by his own uncle, at the same time he finds out his wife has known about it for weeks, and said nothing is a man who is going to struggle to trust the person who stayed quiet. She thought about Mrs. Pierce. Men who find out they've been used don't always aim their anger at the right person first. She thought about what it would cost her if she was wrong about him. She thought about what it would cost him if she did this without him. She was still thinking about it when she came back to the estate and found that the problem had made its own decision. Richard Whitmore was there. He was in the front parlor with Nathaniel, and she heard their voices before she saw them. Richard's familiar warmth, Nathaniel's measured responses. She came through the front door still in her riding cloak and stopped. Mrs. Haley appeared from the kitchen corridor. The look on the woman's face was the specific look of a person who has information and cannot say it plainly. "He arrived an hour ago," Mrs. Haley said quietly. "He's been asking about whether you'd been in town." Charlotte's grip on the satchel tightened. She made a decision in the space of 3 seconds. She went upstairs. She took the satchel to her room. She locked the documents in her traveling case, put the case under the bed, and put the chest from the window seat in front of it. Then she went to the washstand, removed the dust from the road, and went back downstairs. She came into the parlor. Both men looked at her. Richard smiled. "Charlotte, my dear, there you are. Nathaniel said you'd gone to town." "I had," she said. She set her gloves on the side table. She kept her voice easy, her posture easy, everything easy. "I didn't expect you today, Mr. Whitmore. I hope I'm not inconveniencing you. I had business in the area." He watched her with that particular warmth that had a ceiling. "You look well. The country agrees with you." "I find I enjoy the work," she said. Nathaniel was watching her. Not with suspicion, with the focused attention that she had come to understand was his version of trying to read what was beneath what she was saying. He had gotten better at trying. She had noticed. "I was just telling Nathaniel about the Alderton meeting," Richard said. His voice stayed warm, but something in it sharpened without her being able to quite locate the sharpening. "It's routine, of course. Alderton is thorough, but he follows the paper, and the paper is sound." Charlotte looked at Richard. "I'm sure it is," she said. "You've met Alderton, I understand," Richard said. "At Hargrove's dinner." "Briefly." "What did you make of him?" She considered the question for exactly the right length of time, not too quickly, not too slowly. "He struck me as a man who takes his time," she said. "Thorough, as you say. I imagine he's quite good at what he does." Richard's smile didn't change, but something behind it did. "I imagine so," he said. Nathaniel stood. "I'll have Mrs. Haley bring supper. Richard, you'll stay." It was not quite a question. Richard inclined his head. "If you'll have me." What? Supper was the most difficult meal Charlotte had ever sat through, and she had sat through her father signing over his family's legacy at a dinner table, so the comparison meant something. She kept her face pleasant and her comments measured, and she watched Richard Whitmore manage Nathaniel with the skill of a man who has been managing him for years. The careful compliment, the deflecting joke, the way he positioned himself as the most trusted person in the room without ever making a claim to it. It was masterful in the way that certain ugly things are masterful. She watched it with the cold attention of someone cataloging techniques she will need to understand later. And she watched Nathaniel receive it. Watched the way he relaxed degree by degree in his uncle's presence. The careful distance he kept from everyone, from her, from the staff, from the world, shortened with Richard in a way she had not seen it shorten with anyone else. This was going to hurt him. When she understood the full extent of it, when he could no longer avoid understanding it, this was going to be one of the more devastating things that had ever happened to him. And there was nothing she could do about that. She could not make the truth gentler by knowing it was coming. She excused herself before the coffee. She went to the records room. She sat at the small table with her own ledger and wrote out from memory every piece of what Thomas had shown her today, organized by date and by name and by the specific fraudulent act to which each document connected. She worked for an hour and a half by lamplight, precise and thorough, and when she was done, she had 6 pages in her tight, controlled hand that constituted the clearest accounting of Richard Whitmore's scheme that she had yet assembled. She heard Richard leave at 9. She heard Nathaniel in the corridor, his footsteps, his particular quality of movement always deliberate, always controlled. The footsteps stopped outside the records room door. A pause. Then he moved on. She sat with her pen still in her hand and thought, tomorrow I have to tell him. She was not given until tomorrow. The next morning came in with a quality of urgency she felt before she had a full reason for it. She was down early, earlier than usual, and she was coming through the back corridor toward the kitchen when she heard voices outside the window. Nathaniel's voice, and a voice she didn't recognize, low and rapid and alarmed. She went to the window. Nathaniel was standing outside with a man she had seen on the property before, one of the tenant farmers from the northern quarter, a broad-shouldered man named Prentice, whose face was usually calm and was now anything but. She could hear them clearly through the open window. "He came last night," Prentice was saying. "After dark. I wouldn't have known, but my boy was up sick and saw the lantern. He went straight to the North Storage Building, Mr. Whitmore. Straight to it. I know what's kept there." "You're certain it was him?" Nathaniel said. His voice had gone very flat. "I've known your uncle since I was 12 years old, sir. I'm certain." A silence. "What's in the North Storage Building?" Charlotte asked. Both men turned. She was at the window. She had not planned to speak. The words came out of the recognition of what this meant, the recognition arriving faster than the decision. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "The estate's original deed records," he said. "The property surveys. Everything that documents who has owned what land in this county for the past 40 years. She stared at him. "He was going to remove them," she said. It wasn't a question. Nathaniel turned back to Prentice. "The records are they still there? As far as I know, I came straight to you. He left when my boy's lamp came on. I think he saw the light and went." "Go back and stay there," Nathaniel said. "Don't let anyone near that building. Anyone. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir." Prentice left at a pace that was nearly running. Nathaniel stood for a moment with his back to the window. Charlotte could see the set of his shoulders, the particular tension of a man who has just had something he was beginning to suspect confirmed in a way he couldn't rationalize. "Come inside," she said quietly. He came inside. They stood in the back corridor, and she thought, this is the moment, ready or not. "Sit down," she said. He looked at her. "Please," she said. "Nathaniel, sit down." He sat at the kitchen table. Mrs. Haley was not yet in. Charlotte had come down before her. The kitchen was theirs. She went upstairs. She came back with the traveling case. She unlocked it and took out everything Thomas had given her and everything she had written herself, and she set it on the table in front of him. He looked at the documents. He looked at her. "What is this?" he said. "The truth," she said. She sat across from him. "About what your uncle has been doing with this estate, with your decisions, with my family." She paused. "With you." The silence was very large. "How long have you known?" he said. "I started finding irregularities in the grain contracts 6 weeks ago," she said. "I've been building the picture since then. I received the final pieces yesterday from a friend in Richmond who has been helping me trace the documents." She held his gaze. "I was going to tell you today. Last night I decided it was time, and I was going to come to you this morning." He was looking at his documents. His face was doing something she had not seen before, not closed down, not managed. Something was moving through it that he wasn't controlling. He picked up the letter. Richard's letter to Graves. The nephew does the marrying and the acquiring without knowing he's doing either. He read it. The silence that followed was the worst silence she had ever kept with another person. She kept it because there was nothing she could offer that would make this easier, and she knew it, and the kindest thing she could do for him was to sit with him in it, and not fill it with words that would only be noise. He set the letter down. He put both hands flat on the table. He was very still for a long time. Then he said, "Your family, the debt." "Richard engineered it," she said. "Beginning around 1813, he found a supplier connection that allowed him to create paper debts, inflated contracts, false fees recorded in ways that looked legitimate. My father trusted him. He had no reason not to. He was my father's closest associate," Nathaniel said. His voice was strange, flat in a way that had nothing to do with his usual flatness. "After my father died, he was the one who I trusted him with everything." "I know," she said. "The land acquisitions, the decisions I made. I thought I consulted him on all of it. I thought he was helping me understand the estate." He stopped. "He was steering me." "Yes. The Bennett marriage." His eyes came up to hers. "He suggested it. He came to me after your father's debt situation came to his attention. He brought it to my attention, and he said it was an opportunity to resolve a neighborhood difficulty cleanly. He made it sound like generosity, like something my father would have done." "I know," she said again. He stood abruptly. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her and his hands at his sides, and she could see the effort it was taking him to hold himself together. "Did you know," he said, "when you agreed to the marriage, did you know what he was?" "No," she said. "I suspected something was wrong with him from the first time I met him, but I didn't know the extent of it until I started looking at the accounts." She paused. "I agreed to the marriage because my family had no other option. I believed what I was told, that your estate was absorbing the debts as a business arrangement. And instead he used your name and your resources to complete a scheme he'd been building for 15 years. She kept her voice steady and direct. "You didn't know. That matters." He turned. His face turned toward her in the kitchen. Morning light looked like a different man's face than the one that had told her never to speak to him on their wedding night. The management was gone. The ice was not there. What was there instead was something raw and furious and deeply ashamed, and she thought, this is who he actually is. Under all of it, this is who he actually is. "I treated you," he started. "Don't," she said. Not harshly, firmly. "Not right now. We don't have time for that right now. Richard went to the North Storage Building last night. He knows something is moving. He's going to move faster now, and Alderton's meeting with you is in less than a week." She stood. "We need to get these documents to Alderton before that meeting. We need to get to the deed records before Richard does, and we need to do both of those things today." He looked at her. She looked back. "Can you do that?" she said. A pause. Something settled in his face. Not closed down, not shut away, but gathered. The particular gathering of a man who has just taken a blow and is deciding in real time whether to fall or to stand. He stood. "Yes," he said. "Then let's go." Toy. They rode to the North Storage Building together, and Nathaniel checked the records himself, every folder, while Charlotte stood at the door and kept watch with the focused calm of someone who has moved past fear into action. The records were intact. Richard had been interrupted before he could remove anything. Nathaniel came out with a specific folder under his arm. The original land surveys, the Bennett property documentation, the deed chain going back 30 years. His face was set and pale and entirely focused. "I'm sending these to the county courthouse today," he said. "Filed formally. Once they're in the court record, they can't be removed." "Good," she said. "And then I'm going to Alderton." She looked at him. "I'll bring the documents Thomas gave you," he said. "And the ones you compiled." He paused. "Will you come with me?" It was, she thought, perhaps the most important question he had asked her since her wedding day. Not the largest, the most important. "Yes," she said. They rode back to the estate. She gathered the documents. He changed from his work clothes into the coat he wore for formal business. They met at the front door. Nathaniel stopped. He looked at her for a moment. Really looked at her the way he had been learning to. The way that was becoming, degree by degree, the thing she most recognized about him. "You have been working on this," he said, "since your first week in this house." "Since my third day," she said. "And you said nothing." "I didn't have enough yet. And I didn't know—" She stopped. "I didn't know whether you were involved." The words sat between them. He didn't flinch. He didn't get angry. He absorbed it with the steadiness of a man who knows he has given people reason to wonder that about him. "I wasn't," he said. "I know that now," she said. He looked at her for another long moment. "You protected this estate," he said. "You protected my name, and you've been doing it since you arrived while I—" He stopped. "Nathaniel, I told you never to speak to me," he said. His voice was low and had an edge to it that was not anger, but something that sounded like fury turned inward. "On the night we married, I said that to you." She held his gaze. "You did," she said. "I had no right. You had grief," she said. "And you had a man in your ear for years telling you who to be. And yes, you made choices I wouldn't have made, but you're making different ones now." She paused. "That's what I have to work with. That's enough." He was quiet. Then he opened the door. "Let's go," he said. Alderton met them in his office at the Fredericksburg Inn, and what happened in that room over the following 2 hours was the methodical dismantling piece by piece and document by document of 15 years of careful fraud. Alderton was exactly what Charlotte had assessed him to be. At Hargrove's dinner, a man who listens with everything, who asks 3 questions and hears 12 answers, who never shows what he's thinking until he has thought it completely through. He went through every document she and Thomas had compiled. He went through every document Nathaniel produced from the estate records. He asked questions in the careful, patient way of someone assembling something precise. Twice he looked at Charlotte over the papers, and his expression said very plainly that he had not expected her. The second time he said it aloud, "Mrs. Whitmore, how did you identify the grain contract irregularity?" "The margins were wrong for the acreage," she said. "And the supplier wasn't one I could find in any legitimate trading directory." He looked at her for a moment. "You've done this before," he said. "Auditing accounts. I managed my father's household for 5 years when his health declined," she said. "Under difficult circumstances. It teaches you to look carefully." He nodded slowly. Then he looked at Nathaniel. "Mr. Whitmore, the letter, the one your uncle wrote to Graves in March, do you recognize his hand?" Nathaniel picked up the letter. He looked at it for a long moment. "Yes," he said. His voice was controlled and quiet. "That's his hand." Alderton sat back. "I'll need both of you to provide formal statements," he said. "I'll need the originals of the deed records filed with the courthouse, which I understand you've already arranged." He paused. "And I'll need to know where Richard Whitmore is today." Nathaniel and Charlotte looked at each other. "He was at this estate last night," Nathaniel said. attempting to access the storage building where the deed records were kept. Alderton's expression didn't change much, but his hands folded on the table tightened once. "Then we may have less time than I'd like," he said. "I'll need to move today." "So will we," Nathaniel said. They rode back in the early afternoon, and the Virginia road unreeled before them in the late summer heat, and neither of them spoke for the first mile. Then Nathaniel said, "Thomas Caldwell, the man who helped you. Who is he?" She had been waiting for this question. "A childhood friend," she said. "He grew up on the neighboring property to my family's. He's been in Richmond since the war. He found the Crawford and Sons connection in the course of his work and recognized my family's name in the records." "You trust him?" "Completely." A pause. "He'll be at the formal proceedings," Nathaniel said. "If this goes to a county hearing." "Yes," she said. "He'll need to provide testimony about how he found the documents." Nathaniel was quiet. She said nothing. They came over the last hill, and the estate spread out before them in the afternoon light, the fields running down to the tree line, the house with its long windows catching the sun. She had spent 2 months learning this land. She had spent 2 months building something here that she had not set out to build, and she was not yet ready to name what it was, but she felt it, the particular weight of something that has become real without announcing itself. Nathaniel slowed his horse. She slowed hers. He looked at the estate for a moment, and she looked at him, looking at it, and she saw something shift in his face that was not grief and not shame, but something adjacent to both the particular expression of a man who is beginning to understand how close he came to losing something he didn't know he had. "It's still yours," she said quietly. "All of it. When this is done, it's still yours." He turned to look at her. She met his gaze. "Ours," he said, low and deliberate and careful, the way he said the things that cost him something. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked forward. "Then let's go protect it," she said. They rode in. Behind them, somewhere on the road toward the county, Alderton was already moving. The documents were already at the courthouse. The evidence that Charlotte had been building since her 3rd day in this house was already in the hands of the people who could use it. And Richard Whitmore somewhere did not yet know that the woman he had placed in this house, like a useful piece on a board, had spent the last 2 months turning his own scheme against him, one careful record at a time. He would know soon. The county assembly was scheduled for Friday. There were 3 days left. The 3 days before the county assembly were the longest of Charlotte's life, and she had lived through some considerable days. Alderton moved fast, faster than she had expected. By the morning after their meeting in Fredericksburg, 2 federal agents had arrived quietly at the county courthouse and taken formal custody of the deed records Nathaniel had filed. By afternoon, warrants had been drawn for the financial records of Crawford and Sons Supply in Richmond. By evening, a rider had gone out to Richard Whitmore's house with a formal request worded with the particular politeness of official documents that means the opposite of a request, that he present himself to the county assembly on Friday. Charlotte knew all of this because Alderton sent word to Nathaniel, and Nathaniel told her. That by itself was a change, she noted. He had stopped managing what she knew. He had stopped measuring out information in the careful portions of a man who does not fully trust the person he is speaking to. In the 48 hours since they had ridden to Fredericksburg together, something had shifted in the architecture of how he moved through the house. Not dramatically, not with any announcement, but in the small, persistent ways that real change always happens. He ate breakfast at the table. He told her what Alderton said. He asked her opinion on 2 decisions about the estate that he had previously handled alone. She did not remark on any of it. She accepted it as the natural extension of what they had become to each other over the past 2 months, which was something she still did not have a precise word for, but which felt from the inside like the beginning of something solid. She was also simultaneously terrified. Not of the assembly, not of Richard, those she had prepared for. She was terrified because in 3 days everything would be resolved or destroyed. And either way, the particular suspended state she had been living in, the state of working towards something, building toward something of having a purpose that kept her moving forward through every difficulty, would end. And she didn't know yet what would be on the other side of that ending. She thought about this at night, in the quiet of the East Wing, and she thought about it while she rode the fence lines in the morning, and she thought about it while she sat across from Nathaniel at meals, and watched him look at her with the new quality of looking he had developed, direct, without guard, as though he had decided that the cost of the guard was higher than whatever he had been protecting. She thought, I am not the same person who arrived here in June. She thought, neither is he. She did not know yet what to do with that. Richard Whitmore came to the estate on Wednesday evening. He did not know about the documents. He did not know what Alderton had in his possession. He arrived with his usual warmth, his usual bottle of wine, his usual quality of a man who has never had reason to believe the ground would shift under him. Charlotte heard him from the upstairs corridor and made a deliberate decision. She went downstairs. She came into the parlor where Nathaniel and Richard were already in conversation, and she saw in the fraction of a second before Richard adjusted that he had not expected her to join them. He had expected, as he always had, that she would stay in the background, that she would be where he had put her, useful and peripheral and easy to overlook. "Charlotte," he said with a smile. "What a pleasant surprise." "Richard," she said. She sat in the chair across from him. She did not ask permission. "You've had word from Alderton." It was not a question. His smile held, but his eyes did the thing she had been watching them do for 2 months, the quick internal adjustment, the recalculation. "A formal inquiry," he said. "Routine, as I said before. The federal office conducts these reviews from time to time." "About land transfers," she said. "Specifically the ones from 1813 onward in this county. Among others," he said. "It's a broad review, nothing specific." "Crawford and Sons Supply," she said. The smile stayed on his face. The room changed. Nathaniel beside him was very still. "I'm not familiar with—" Richard started. "Edmund Graves," she said. "He filed the company with the Richmond Recorder in February of 1813. He's been named as agent in 7 transactions, all of which resulted in land transfer to entities that ultimately connect back to you." She kept her voice even. Factual. The voice she used when she was going through accounts and wanted the numbers to speak for themselves. "The grain contracts with Whitmore Estate go back to 1814. The premium above market rate paid annually amounts to a substantial sum that went to Crawford and Sons, and therefore to you, Richard, out of your own nephew's accounts." Silence. Richard looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Nathaniel. "Son," he said, and his voice changed, not the warmth now, but something beneath the warmth. Something that had been there all along, and was now stripped of its cover, visible for what it was. "You're going to listen to this woman over your own family." Nathaniel looked at him. "She's my wife," he said. She has been in this house for 2 months. I have been in your life for 30 years. Your father trusted me with everything." "My father trusted you with everything," Nathaniel said. His voice was flat. "And I trusted you with everything after him. And while I did, you were using my accounts to pay yourself. You were using my name to acquire land that you wanted. You arranged my marriage to a woman whose family you had deliberately ruined, so that you could complete a transfer you'd been engineering for 3 years. He stopped. The flatness in his voice had something under it that was not flat at all. "Tell me I'm wrong." Richard was quiet. For the first time since Charlotte had known him, Richard Whitmore had nothing to put in the space where his words usually went. "The documents are already with Alderton," Charlotte said. "Filed with the courthouse. The formal hearing is Friday. You received the summons this morning." He looked at her. And for just a moment, one moment, with the performance fully gone, she saw what was actually behind Richard Whitmore's face. Not a warm man. Not a family man. A man who had been running a calculation for 30 years and had for the first time come up against a number he hadn't accounted for. He stood. "I'll have counsel present on Friday," he said. His voice was formal now, all business. The warmth entirely gone, and the absence of it made the room feel oddly cleaner. "That's your right," Charlotte said. He looked at Nathaniel. "I built this estate," he said. "Everything your father had, I helped him build. Everything you have, you took," Nathaniel said. "For 30 years you took. And you told yourself it was family, and it was building something, and it was what my father would have wanted." He stood. He was a full head taller than his uncle, and he used none of it. He simply stood and looked at him with the steady, stripped quality of a man who is done. "My father would not have wanted this. You know he wouldn't, and you did it anyway." Richard left. The door closed behind him. Charlotte and Nathaniel stood in the parlor in the particular silence left by something that has finally been said. She looked at him. His face was doing something complicated and controlled, and she could see the effort it was costing him, the particular effort of a man who has built his entire life around the idea that the people he trusted were trustworthy, and has just had that idea removed at the foundation. "Nathaniel," she said. "Don't," he said. Not harshly, carefully. "Not yet. Give me a moment." She gave him the moment. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to her, and she watched his hands at his sides the way they tightened once and then deliberately opened. After a while he said, "He was at my father's deathbed. He held my father's hand at the end. I watched him do it." She said nothing. "I don't know," he said slowly, "whether any of it was real. Any of it. The 30 years. Whether there was a single moment in my life with that man that wasn't part of a calculation." "I don't know either," she said honestly. "I don't think you can know that, and I don't think it matters as much as you think it does right now." He turned. "How does it not matter?" he said. "Because whether it was real or not, what you built is real," she said. "This estate, the people on it, the choices you've made since I've been here, those are yours. He didn't make those." She paused. "He tried to make you into a tool. He failed. Because you are not a tool. You're a man who, when he found out the truth, did the right thing the same day he found it." He looked at her for a long time. "You have a great deal of faith in me," he said. "For a woman I told to never speak to me." She caught it. It was his version of acknowledging it. Not an apology yet, but the first movement toward one. "I have evidence," she said. "I'm a woman who works from evidence." Something moved through his face that was almost not quite, but almost a smile. "Yes," he said. "I've noticed." Thursday passed in the controlled urgency of preparation. Colby arrived from Fredericksburg in the morning Charlotte had sent for him when Alderton confirmed the Friday hearing, because she wanted her own legal mind in the room. He was a small, precise man with the quality of stillness that good lawyers develop, and he spent 2 hours at the dining table with Charlotte and Nathaniel, going through every document establishing the chain of evidence, identifying what would be challenged and how. Thomas Caldwell arrived in the early afternoon. He came to the door, and Charlotte answered it, and he looked at her face and said, "It's moving." "Friday," she said. "County Assembly. Are you ready to testify?" "That's why I'm here," he said. She brought him in. The moment Thomas walked into the dining room, something happened that she had not anticipated and should have. Nathaniel looked at Thomas Caldwell with the specific quality of a man encountering for the first time in the flesh a name that has been present in his house for weeks in a way he couldn't fully account for. He looked at him the way men sometimes look at other men when a woman they are beginning to feel something about has mentioned that man's name more than once. Thomas, for his part, looked at Nathaniel with the frank assessment of a soldier direct measuring, arriving at conclusions quickly. Charlotte watched this exchange happen in approximately 4 seconds and said calmly, "Nathaniel, this is Thomas Caldwell. Tom, this is my husband." Thomas put out his hand. "Mr. Whitmore." Nathaniel shook it. "Mr. Caldwell?" A pause. "Charlotte has spoken highly of you." "She's spoken highly of you as well," Thomas said. "Recently." Nathaniel looked at her briefly. She kept her face arranged. "Sit down," she said to both of them. "We have a great deal to get through before tomorrow." They sat. She watched over the course of the next 3 hours as Nathaniel and Thomas worked through the documents together, two men who had no particular reason to like each other, finding in the task in front of them the particular respect that competent people develop for other competent people when the work is serious enough. By the time Colby had finished his legal review and they had established the order of presentation for tomorrow, something had settled between the three of them that wasn't quite friendship, but was considerably better than suspicion. That evening, Thomas sat with Charlotte in the records room after the men had gone to their separate quarters. The lamp was low. Outside, the Virginia night was warm and full of crickets. "He's not what I expected," Thomas said. "No," she said. "He looks at you differently than men usually look at women they've decided not to care about." She kept her eyes on the ledger she was reviewing. "Tom," she said, "I'm just saying." "I know what you're just saying," she said. "Focus on tomorrow." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you all right?" he asked. Quietly, in the voice he used when he meant it. She stopped writing. She thought about the question. "Ask me on Saturday," she said. "After this is done." He nodded. She went back to her ledger. Friday morning came in hard and bright. The County Assembly Hall in Fredericksburg was a long, plain room that had seen its share of difficult proceedings over the years, and it had the particular atmosphere of a place where the weight of public business had accumulated until the walls themselves seemed aware of it. By 9 in the morning, it was nearly full landowners, merchants, county residents, who had heard something was happening without knowing the specifics, the way communities always sense the approach of significant events before they arrive. Charlotte sat at the table to Alderton's right, with Colby beside her and Thomas behind. Nathaniel sat at the same table directly beside her, close enough that she could feel the particular tension in him, not fear she had come to understand, but the high-wire focus of a man who has decided to do something that will cost him, and is paying attention to every detail of the paying. Richard Whitmore came in at 9:05. He had counsel, a man named Forsyth from Richmond, well-dressed, with the settled authority of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations. Richard himself had recovered his composure overnight. The warmth was back. The confidence was back. He looked, Charlotte thought, like a man who had decided that the game was still winnable. She watched him scan the room. She watched him register Colby. She watched him register Thomas, and she saw the very slight pause. Thomas was not a name Richard had anticipated, she was certain of it. Thomas was the piece Richard hadn't known about. His eyes moved to her last. She met them without expression. He looked away first. Alderton called the assembly to order. The presentation of evidence took 90 minutes. Alderton was methodical. He walked through the Crawford and Sons documents, the deed transfer records, the grain contract irregularities, the financial trail from the Whitmore estate accounts to Edmund Graves and through Graves to Richard. He laid it out with the patience of a man who has been building this case for 8 months and is not going to rush the ending. Forsyth objected 3 times. Each objection was reasonable, and each was overruled on the basis of the document record because the document record was what Charlotte had spent 2 months making irrefutable. Then Thomas testified. He was precise and direct, and he gave his account of finding Crawford and Sons in the Richmond trading records with the clarity of a man who has been in difficult rooms before and knows how to make the truth sound exactly like what it is. Forsyth cross-examined him. "Mr. Caldwell, you are a childhood friend of Mrs. Whitmore's, is that correct?" "That's correct," Thomas said. "So your interest in pursuing these records was not professional but personal. You were looking for something that would help a friend." "I found something that was already there," Thomas said. "Whether I was looking or not doesn't change what I found." There was a sound from the assembled room, not quite laughter, not quite approval, but the recognition that a question had been answered well. Then Charlotte was called. She stood. She walked to the front of the room. She was aware of the assembled county looking at her, the wife of the man whose uncle was on trial. The woman who had arrived in this community 2 months ago as a name attached to a debt settlement who had turned out to be something else entirely. She was aware of Nathaniel watching her. She gave her account. She had prepared it carefully, and she delivered it exactly as prepared. The discovery of the grain contract irregularities. The engagement of James Colby. The records search the letter, the approach to Alderton. She spoke plainly and specifically, And she did not dramatize, and she did not minimize, and when Forsyth stood to cross-examine her, she was ready for every question he asked, and one he didn't. Mrs. Whitmore. Forsyth said, "You arrived at the Whitmore estate in June of this year. In approximately 8 weeks, you conducted what amounts to a comprehensive audit of the estate's accounts, engaged outside legal counsel, without your husband's knowledge, and made contact with a federal official, all without informing your husband of your activities. Is that correct?" "It is," she said. "And why did you not inform your husband?" She looked at him steadily. "Because I did not yet know whether my husband was involved," she said. "I had found evidence of financial fraud. The fraud involved his estate and his accounts. Until I understood the full extent of what had occurred and who was responsible, I believed it was my obligation to build the case completely before presenting it to anyone, including Nathaniel." A pause. "And when you had built the case completely, I presented it to my husband the morning I completed it," she said. "We came to Mr. Alderton together the same day." She sat down. Nathaniel beside her said nothing, but his hand under the table found hers. She kept her face forward. His fingers closed around hers briefly once, and then he released her hand and put it back on the table. A second. No more. She did not look at him, not. But something in her chest did something that she noted for later when she had privacy enough to examine it properly. The twist came at 11:30, and Charlotte had not seen it coming. Alderton called one final witness. Edmund Graves. Charlotte had not known Graves was in Fredericksburg. She had not known Alderton had found him. She looked at Nathaniel, and he shook his head slightly. He hadn't known either. Graves was a thin man in his 40s, with the particular look of someone who has been making compromises for so long he can no longer identify what he compromised from. He sat at the front of the room, and he looked at his hands, and he said in a voice that was neither loud nor proud, "I'll tell you what I know." What he knew was everything. He named Richard directly. He named the properties. He named the families, the Harrisons, the Wentworths, the Bennetts. He described the scheme in the specific vocabulary of someone who executed it, the mechanics of how a man could be stripped of his land over 3 years and believe he was simply experiencing bad luck. He described the Bennett arrangement. He described Richard Whitmore's letter to him in March, the nephew does the marrying and the acquiring, without knowing he's doing either. He described one thing Charlotte had not known. There was a woman, Graves said, before the Bennett arrangement, 3 years ago, a young woman in Richmond that Mr. Whitmore introduced to his nephew. She, Richard, arranged the relationship. He believed if Nathaniel was romantically occupied, he'd be less attentive to the estate accounts. When she left, he stopped. Charlotte felt something very still and very significant settle into place. When she left, Alderton said, "Richard arranged for her to leave," Graves said. She didn't leave willingly. She was given information that made her believe Nathaniel had been unfaithful. Richard manufactured the evidence. She left believing she'd been deceived. He paused. Nathaniel never knew why. The room was quiet. Charlotte turned to look at Nathaniel. His face was, she had no word for it. Every layer of composure he had built over years was still there, but beneath it, something had shifted so fundamentally that the structure above it looked like it might simply fall. She understood in that moment with complete clarity what had made him the man she had married. What had sealed him into the cold and the distance and the never speak to me. It had not been the ordinary damage of disappointment. It had been the specific damage of a grief that had been manufactured. A loss that had been engineered. A wound inflicted deliberately by the person he most trusted to keep him isolated and distracted and controllable. She thought he has been living inside a lie for 3 years, and he didn't know it. She thought no wonder he didn't trust me. He stopped trusting everyone. She thought Richard Whitmore didn't just steal from him. He stole him from himself. Forsyth was on his feet immediately. Objections, procedural challenges, questions about Graves's credibility. The room was loud for several minutes. Alderton managed it with the patience of a man who has seen louder rooms. Charlotte watched Nathaniel. He was very still. His jaw was set. His eyes were on the table in front of him. She put her hand on the table between them. Not touching. Just there. Available. He looked at her hand. Then he looked at her. And she saw at the exact moment when a man who has been carrying something alone for 3 years recognizes that he does not have to carry it that way anymore. The recognition arrived in his face like something being unlocked from the inside. He put his hand over hers. This time, he didn't let go. Richard Whitmore across the room was watching them. Charlotte saw him watching. She saw him look at their joined hands, and she saw the thing that crossed his face. Not guilt, not shame, but the specific expression of a man who has just understood that the final piece of his plan has failed in a way he cannot reverse. He had put Charlotte in that house to be a mechanism, a signature, a legal connection. He had not anticipated that she would spend 2 months building a case against him inside his own nephew's home. He had not anticipated that Nathaniel would look at a woman he'd been told to ignore and find over the course of a Virginia summer something worth protecting. He had not anticipated that the piece he had moved so carefully onto the board would turn out to be the one piece that dismantled the game. He was very quiet now. Forsyth was talking. Richard Whitmore was looking at his nephew's wife and understanding for the first time who she actually was. Charlotte met his eyes. She held them for a moment. Then she looked away. She did not need anything from him. Not acknowledgement, not fear, not remorse. She had stopped needing anything from Richard Whitmore the morning she had found the grain contracts and understood what she was dealing with. What happened to him now was a matter for Alderton and the law and the particular machinery of consequence. What mattered to her was on the other side of this table, with his hand over hers. Alderton called a recess at noon. In the corridor outside the assembly hall, Charlotte found herself briefly alone. Colby had gone to consult with Alderton's team. Thomas had stepped outside, and for a moment there was just the quiet of the hallway and the sound of the room behind them. Nathaniel came to find her. He stood in front of her. He had his formal coat on, and his face had the stripped quality it had been wearing since Graves testified the quality of a man who has had his private architecture exposed in a public room and is still standing in the rubble of it, trying to work out which pieces are load-bearing. "The woman," he said. "Eleanor." "You don't have to," Charlotte started. "I grieved her for 2 years," he said. "I believed she had. I thought I had driven her away. I thought I had done something, been something that made her go." He stopped. "I closed everything down after that. Everyone." A pause. "You." "I know," she said. It was not about you," he said. "When I said those things to you on our wedding night, it was not a judgment of you." "I know that now," she said. "I think I knew it then. Not completely, but enough." He looked at her. "You knew I was damaged," he said, "from the beginning. And you came to this house, and you fixed the roof, and you went to the sick child, and you spent 2 months building a case against the man who hurt this estate. And you did all of it while I—" He stopped. "While I told you not to speak to me." "Nathaniel." "I am trying," he said, "to tell you that I understand what you gave up to come here, what you gave up every day you stayed. And I want you to know that I—" He stopped again. He was not a man who said things easily. She had known that since June. She had spent 2 months learning the specific weight of every word he chose to say, because he chose them carefully and meant them entirely. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly. "This is my home now. These are my people, Greer and Mrs. Haley, and the Briggs family and Mrs. Pierce. This is mine. I built it into mine one day at a time, and I'm not leaving it." He looked at her steadily. "Even so," he said, "I owe you an accounting that I am not yet, that I don't have the words for yet. But I will." He paused. "You have my word." She held his gaze. Coming from Nathaniel Whitmore, she understood exactly what those words cost, and exactly what they meant. "All right," she said. "I'll hold you to it." Something moved through his face, relief, she thought. The particular relief of a man who has offered something important and had it received without conditions. The recess ended. They went back into the assembly room together. The verdict, when it came, was not dramatic in the way of stories. It was methodical. Alderton presented his findings formally documented and sourced and irrefutable, and the county magistrates reviewed them, and the discussion that followed was the discussion of men who have all the information they need and are simply working through the procedural steps of acting on it. Richard Whitmore was taken into federal custody at 2 p.m. He walked out of the assembly hall between two of Alderton's agents, and he did not look at Nathaniel, and he did not look at Charlotte, and the warmth was entirely gone from him now, not because it had been replaced by something else, but because there was nothing left to maintain it for. Edmund Graves, in exchange for his testimony, was given a lesser charge. He would face consequences, but smaller ones. Charlotte had no particular feelings about this. She had not built the case out of a desire for punishment. She had built it out of a desire for truth, and the truth had arrived. The formal finding included the reversal of the fraudulent land transfers, the Harrisons, the Wentworths, and the Bennett family property among them. The process would take months. But the finding was clear. The transfers had been obtained through fraud, and fraud nullified the transaction, her father's land. Charlotte sat very still when Alderton read that part of the finding. She had not allowed herself to think about it, not directly, not as something she was working toward for herself, because she had learned very early in life that wanting something badly was not a reliable path to getting it, and she had trained herself to keep her eyes on the work rather than the outcome. But she had known. Under all of it, she had known that this was what had been taken from her family, and that recovering it was part of what was at stake. Nathaniel's hand found hers under the table again. He did not look at her. She did not look at him. But his hand was warm and certain, and she held it and thought, this is what it feels like, when the thing you've been working toward finally arrives. It feels like this, like holding something real after a very long time of holding only the shape of it. Thomas caught her eye from across the room. He gave her a small nod. She gave him one back. Outside afterward, in the bright afternoon of a Virginia Friday, the county residents who had been inside came out into the air, and the conversation that follows significant public events moved through the gathered crowd in the particular way of people who have witnessed something and are working out what it means. Charlotte stood with Nathaniel and Thomas and Colby, and people came to speak to them. The magistrate who had questioned her at Hargrove's dinner, who shook her hand with a different quality than the dinner had suggested he was capable of. The Prentice family who had ridden in from the northern quarter to see it through. Mrs. Pierce, who had Charlotte discovered, attended the entire proceeding from a seat in the back row without anyone telling her to. The old woman came to Charlotte and looked at her for a long moment. "His mother would have liked you," she said. "I said that before. I mean it more now." "Thank you," Charlotte said. Mrs. Pierce looked at Nathaniel. "You married a better woman than you deserved in June," she said. "You're working toward deserving her now. Keep working." Nathaniel looked at the old woman. "Yes, ma'am," he said. It was, Charlotte thought, possibly the most sincere thing she had ever heard him say. Thomas shook Nathaniel's hand before he left. "She's the most capable person I've ever known," Thomas said. "I say that having known her since we were children. You should know it too." "I know it," Nathaniel said. Thomas looked at him for a moment. Then, "Good." He tipped his hat to Charlotte. "Saturday," he said. "You said ask you on Saturday." "Ask me Saturday," she said. He went. She and Nathaniel were left in the afternoon light with the crowd thinning around them and the particular quality of silence that follows large events when the events are finally genuinely over. "Ready to go home," he said. She looked at him. Home. He had said it without thinking. She suspected said it the way people say the things that have quietly become true while they weren't watching. "Yes," she said. They rode back to the estate side by side, and the Virginia road was long and familiar under them, and the fields coming up to the property line were green and full, and the summer was beginning just barely to tip toward the first suggestion of fall. Charlotte rode with her back straight and her face forward and her hands easy on the reins, and she thought about her father, who would get his land back. She thought about the Briggs boy, who had recovered completely from his fever. She thought about Mrs. Haley, who had known from the beginning that something was wrong, and had stayed and kept the house running anyway. She thought about all of it, 2 months of it, from the records room to the fence line to the assembly hall. And she thought, I did not come here for this. But I built it anyway, out of what was available, out of what was possible, out of the particular materials that were in front of me. That was what she had always done. What her mother had taught her and her father had accidentally reinforced by needing her, and what she had practiced so long, it had become something she simply was. You work with what you have. You look at what is actually there. You build from the ground up, one careful record at a time. And sometimes, not always. Not often, what you build turns out to be more than you were trying to build. She thought about Nathaniel's hand under the table. She thought Saturday. Ask me on Saturday. She thought, I think I already know the answer. She rode on. Thomas came back on Saturday morning as promised. Charlotte was in the kitchen with Mrs. Haley when she heard his horse on the drive, and she came out to meet him with her hands still floury from the bread she'd been helping shape, because Mrs. Haley had decided 3 weeks ago that teaching Charlotte to bake was a project worth undertaking, and Charlotte had decided that learning was worth the effort. Thomas looked at her hands and raised an eyebrow. Bread, she said. You, he said, are a woman of continuous surprises. She wiped her hands on her apron, and they walked together to the bench at the edge of the kitchen garden, because it was early still, and the morning was cool. And they both understood without saying it that this was the conversation they'd been postponing since Wednesday. Saturday, he said. How are you? She sat for a moment with the question. I don't know yet, she said honestly. I think I've been moving so fast for so long that I haven't stopped to find out. Stop now, he said. I've got time. She looked at the kitchen garden, the herbs she'd planted in July, the rows of late-season vegetables that had come in better than anyone expected. She had put her hands in this ground. She had watered this. It was hers in the particular way that things become yours when you have tended them. My father gets his land back, she said. Yes. And Daniel has a future that doesn't depend on my sacrifice. Yes. And Richard Whitmore is in federal custody. Yes. So by any reasonable accounting, she said, everything I came here to do is done. Thomas was quiet for a moment. And everything you didn't come here to do, he said. She looked at him. He looked back with the honest eyes of someone who has known her long enough to ask the question directly. That's the part I don't know yet, she said. Charlotte? He said her name the way old friends say names, with the full weight of every year behind it. I watched that man hold your hand in a federal proceeding in front of the entire county. I watched his face when Graves testified about Eleanor. I watched him look at you when Alderton read the Bennett finding. He paused. What are you waiting to know? She was quiet. Whether it's real, she said at last. Whether what's happened between us over these 2 months is real. Or whether it's the situation. Whether it's two people thrown together by difficult circumstances who've confused proximity and shared purpose for something more permanent. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. You've never confused anything in your life, he said. That's not who you are. She had no answer for that. He stood. He picked up his hat. He's a hard man, Thomas said. I won't pretend otherwise. He's got damage in him that's going to take time. But I've known you since you were 8 years old, throwing rocks at my fence and telling me I'd built it wrong, and you do not look at people the way you've been looking at him and mean nothing by it. She looked up at him. Was I looking at him? She said. Charlotte, he said with tremendous patience. The whole county was looking at you, looking at him. He set his hat on and walked to his horse and swung up with the ease of a man who has spent years on horseback. Tell your father I'll ride out to see him next week, he said. And stop waiting to know things you already know. He rode out. She sat with the cooling morning and the herb garden, and the particular weight of what Thomas had just said, and she thought he's right. I do already know. I've known for a while. I've just been afraid of what to do with knowing. She was still sitting there when she heard the kitchen door and then footsteps. And then Nathaniel was standing at the edge of the garden with 2 cups of coffee, one of which he held toward her with the straightforward gesture of a man who has decided to stop making gestures complicated. She took it. He sat beside her. They drank their coffee in the cool morning air, and the silence between them had the quality it had been developing for weeks, not empty, not tense, but companionable, the silence of 2 people who have been through enough together that they don't need noise to fill the space. Thomas is gone, he said. He'll come back to see his family next week. She paused. He said to tell you you're a hard man. Nathaniel looked at his coffee. He's not wrong, he said. No, she said. He's not. Another silence. My father received word yesterday, Nathaniel said, about the formal reversal, the Bennett land. He paused. Alderton said the process will take 3 to 4 months to complete legally, but the fraudulent transfer has been voided. The land is Bennett land again. Charlotte held her coffee cup with both hands and felt something move through her that was large and quiet and complete. Thank you, she said, for going to Alderton with me. You had already done the work, he said. I showed up. You showed up, she said. That mattered. He was quiet. Then, I want to tell you something. She waited. When Graves testified, he said, about Eleanor. He stopped. Started again. I spent 3 years believing I had done something to drive her away, something in me, some fundamental deficiency, that I was... He stopped again. The words were clearly not easy, and he was not a man who forced words that weren't ready. I closed everything after that. I decided that if I didn't let anyone close, I couldn't... He set down his coffee cup. I said what I said to you on our wedding night because I was protecting myself, not from you, from the possibility of you. She looked at him. I know, she said softly. I don't think you should forgive me for it easily, he said. I don't think easy forgiveness serves either of us. I wasn't planning to, she said. Something moved through his face, surprised, and then not surprised, and then something that might have been of all things grateful. Good, he said. I do forgive you, she said. But you're right that it wasn't easy, and you should know what it cost. Tell me, he said. So she did. She told him about the first night in her rooms with the blank ledger and her name written at the top of the page. She told him about sitting at the long dining table alone for 3 weeks. She told him about riding to Mrs. Pierce's house and the old woman saying he's a good man caught in a bad pattern and deciding on the basis of that and her own judgment to stay the course. She told him about the fear, the real fear not of him, but of the possibility that she had made a mistake she couldn't unmake, that she had given up her freedom for a man who was genuinely incapable of seeing her. He listened without interrupting. His face was completely present, not managed, not closed. Just there, taking in everything she said with the focus of a man who understands that he is being trusted with something important and is determined to be worthy of the trust. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. I see you, he said finally. I want you to know that. Whatever I failed to see in June, I see you now. Completely. She looked at him. I know, she said. I started to know it around the time of the Briggs boy. He looked at her. That long ago. You asked how he was, she said. You came to that yard, and the first thing you asked was how the child was. And then you told me about your mother. She paused. A man who doesn't feel anything doesn't do that. He was quiet. I thought I had stopped feeling things, he said. You hadn't, she said. You'd just gotten very good at not showing it. He picked up his coffee cup again. His hands were steady, and she had learned those hands the way they moved on the fence line, the way they handled the gray, the way they had found hers under the table at the assembly. She knew those hands now. She knew a great deal about this man now that she had not known in June. Charlotte, he said. Yes. I want to ask you something." She waited. He set the cup down. He turned toward her with the full attention that was, she had come to understand his version of opening himself entirely. No management, no distance, just the complete directness of a man who has decided that honesty, however costly, is the only currency he has left that's worth anything. "I want to ask whether you would be willing," he said, "to start over." She looked at him carefully. "Start over," she said. "Not from June," he said. "Not from the beginning. I don't mean I'm not asking you to forget what's happened. I'm asking whether you would be willing to begin what should have begun in June, the actual marriage, not the arrangement." He paused. His voice was low and steady, and it cost him something she could hear it. "I'm asking whether you'd be willing to let me be your husband. Not in contract. In the way that word is supposed to mean." The morning was very quiet. Charlotte looked at this man, the man who had told her never to speak to him, who had been broken by a manufactured grief and walled himself into the wreckage, who had watched her fix a roof and nurse a sick child and dismantle a 15-year fraud from inside his own records room, and had piece by piece allowed himself to be changed by the fact of her. She thought about everything it had cost her to get here, the fear and the loneliness and the long nights in the East Wing with her ledger and her questions, and no guarantee of any answer. She thought about her father's land. She thought about Mrs. Pierce and Mrs. Haley, and the Briggs family, and the fence lines repaired, and the irrigation channels cleared, and the roofs fixed, and the accounts made honest. She had built this place into something. She had built herself into it. She thought about what it would mean to leave. She thought about what it would mean to stay. "Yes," she said. He exhaled. She heard it, the particular sound of a man releasing something he has been holding for a long time. "Yes," she said again more firmly. "But I have conditions." He looked at her. "Of course you do," he said. And it was, she caught it clearly this time, it was unmistakably dry. Unmistakably warm. The ghost of something that had been closed down for 3 years and was now tentatively and carefully beginning to open. She felt something loosen in her own chest. "The estate accounts," she said. "I keep them." "Done," he said. "The tenant families in the Eastern Quarter, regular visits, regular maintenance, not when it becomes a crisis." "Done. My father visits when he wishes. Thomas Caldwell is welcome in this house." "Done," he said, and then, "Caldwell's not as frightening as he thinks he is." "He's not trying to frighten you," she said. "He's trying to make sure I'm all right." "Is he satisfied?" She considered. "Ask him yourself," she said. "When he comes next week." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. She looked at him. "One more condition," she said. "Tell me. You talk to me," she said. "Not orders, not logistics, not household matters. You talk to me the way you talked in that small study with your coat off and the ledger on your knee. The way you've been talking to me for the past 2 weeks." She held his gaze. "Don't close back down. Whatever you need from me to make that possible, ask for it. But don't go back behind the wall." He was very still. She saw the thing that moved through his face, the recognition, the cost, the decision. "I'll try," he said. "That's the honest answer. I'll try. And when I fail, because I will. Charlotte, I'm not. I'm not someone who changes easily or completely. When you fail," she said, "I'll tell you, and you'll try again." He looked at her. "That's a great deal of patience," he said. "I'm a patient woman," she said. "You've met me." The thing in his face, the warmth, the almost humor, the beginnings of something that might one day be easy between them, moved fully into his eyes. "I have," he said, extensively. She picked up her coffee. "Good," she said. "Then we understand each other." The formal legal process took 4 months, as Alderton had predicted. Charlotte's father, George Bennett, came to the estate in September, not for any formal occasion, simply because Charlotte had written him a letter saying, "Come and see where I live," and he had come. He was thinner than she remembered, and there was a quality in him that had been absent for 3 years. Not joy, exactly, not yet, but the possibility of it, the way a field looks in late winter, when the frost is finally off and you can see the green beginning to push through. He walked the property with Charlotte and Nathaniel, the three of them, out along the fence line in the September morning, and her father asked Nathaniel questions about the soil and the crop rotation and the tobacco yields with the interest of a man who has spent his life understanding land and recognizes when land is being well managed. Nathaniel answered him directly and specifically and without condescension, and Charlotte walked beside them and listened and thought this is what should have happened in June. This is what would have happened if none of the rest of it had happened first. But none of the rest of it wouldn't have happened, and she wouldn't be who she was now, and neither would he. Some things require the long way around. Her father pulled her aside at the edge of the east field, while Nathaniel went to speak to Greer about the horses. "Charlotte," he said. "Papa." He looked at her for a long time, with the look of a father who is seeing his daughter clearly, perhaps for the first time in years, without the filter of his own guilt or his own fear about what she had sacrificed. "Are you happy?" he asked. She considered the question honestly. "I'm becoming happy," she said. "That's the accurate answer. We're becoming something. It's not finished yet." "But it's good." She looked at Nathaniel across the field, talking to Greer, gesturing toward the horses with the ease of a man on his own land with someone he trusts. "Yes," she said. "It's good." Her father put his arm around her shoulders. "Your mother would have liked him," he said, once she got past the first impression. Charlotte laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that came without thinking, without management, the kind that meant something was genuinely easy. Her father held her tighter for a moment. "She'd have liked what you did," he said. "What you built here. She'd have been very proud." Charlotte held on to that for a long moment. Then, "She'd have wanted to see the accounts," she said, "to check my work." Her father laughed, a real one. The first real laugh she had heard from him in 3 years. "Oh, undoubtedly," he said. "Boik." The twist came in October, and Charlotte had not seen it coming. She had been in the records room. She was always eventually in the records room when Nathaniel came in without knocking, which he had been doing for several weeks now, and set a letter on the table in front of her. She looked at it. The letter was from a law office in Richmond. It was addressed to Nathaniel. She could see from the top line that it pertained to the Richard Whitmore case. "Read it," he said. She read it. It took her 2 passes to fully understand what she was reading. Richard Whitmore, in the course of the federal proceedings, had offered additional information in exchange for a reduction in his sentence. The information pertained to the projected federal road routes, the routes that made the contested land valuable. The land surveyors had completed their preliminary routes in September. The routes had been adjusted from the earlier projections. The Bennett land was no longer on the primary route, but Whitmore Estate was. The original surveys, the ones Richard had been working from, had shown the route crossing the Bennett property. Those surveys had been superseded. The actual route, the one the federal planners had finalized, crossed the northern quarter of Whitmore Estate directly. The land Richard had been trying to acquire through Charlotte's marriage through the Bennett connection was not the land that would triple in value when the road announcement came. The land that would triple in value was already Nathaniel's, had always been Nathaniel's. Richard had spent 15 years and ruined 3 families, and manufactured grief and engineered a marriage, and still ended up without the prize he'd been angling for because he'd been working from outdated surveys. Charlotte set the letter down. She looked at Nathaniel. He looked back. "He did all of it," she said slowly, "for land he never needed to acquire." "It appears so," Nathaniel said. She thought about the grain contracts, the Harrisons, the Wentworths, her father's 3 years of debt and desperation, her own wedding night, and the words "never speak to me," and the East Wing rooms, and the blank ledger. All of it. For a scheme built on wrong information. "That's—" She stopped. "Yes," he said. "That's almost tragic," she said. "Almost," he said. "Not quite." She looked at him. Not quite, she agreed. He sat down across from her. Alderton says the road announcement will be made public in the spring, he said. The northern quarter will be affected. We'll need to make decisions about it. We'll need to review the survey maps, she said, and talk to the tenant families in the north quarter before anything is announced publicly. They should hear it from us first. Agreed. He paused. I was thinking we could ride out there tomorrow, together. She looked at him. 3 months ago, 2 months ago, even he would not have said together with that particular ease. He would have said it as a concession, or a formality, or not at all. Yes, she said. Tomorrow morning. He started to stand. Nathaniel. He stopped. The road, she said. When it comes through the value of this land, that's your family's future. That's real, and it's yours, and it has nothing to do with what Richard tried to take. He looked at her steadily. It has everything to do with you, he said. It was already mine before I understood what I had. You're the one who fought to keep it mine. She held his gaze. He was not a man who said things he didn't mean. She had known that from the beginning. Every word he chose he meant. She felt the full weight of those words and let herself feel it, because she had learned in the past months that not feeling things was a form of dishonesty she could no longer afford. Go away, she said. I have work to finish. The warmth in his face, present and real, and no longer hidden from her, made the room different than it had been before he walked in. Good night, Charlotte, he said. Good night, Nathaniel. He left. She sat for a moment with her hands still on the letter and thought about the strange long road from June to October, from a wedding night that had been a wound to an October evening in a records room where a man she had not loved said good night to her, and the room felt warmer after he left. She picked up her pen. She opened her ledger. She began to write. The first snow came early that year in November, light and brief and gone by afternoon. Charlotte was in the kitchen with Mrs. Haley when it started, and Mrs. Haley looked out the window and said, Well, that's early. And Charlotte looked too, and they stood together for a moment watching it fall. Two women who had built something in this house together without ever formally acknowledging that's what they were doing. Mrs. Whitmore? Mrs. Haley said. Yes. When you first came here, in June. She paused. I wasn't sure about you. Charlotte looked at her. I know, she said. You were very professional about it. I didn't know what kind of woman you'd be, Mrs. Haley said. Whether you'd be the kind that tells people what to do, or the kind that knows what needs doing. And now, Charlotte said. Mrs. Haley looked at her with the directness of a woman who has worked for this family for 20 years and has earned the right to say what she thinks. Now, she said, I'd rather lose this job than lose you. Charlotte looked at her for a moment. Then she said very simply, You're not going to lose either. Mrs. Haley nodded once briskly in the manner of a woman who has said the important thing and is ready to move back to the work. The bread's ready, she said. Then let's take it out, Charlotte said. Nathaniel found her that evening at the window in the small sitting room off the main parlor, the one that looked north toward the fields. She had a book open on her knee, but she wasn't reading it. She was watching the last of the light go. He came in and sat in the other chair. He had a glass of whiskey. He set a second glass beside her, which she had not asked for, and which he had brought anyway, which was she had catalogued this kind of thing for months now, his particular way of paying attention. Not asking, just noticing and acting on the noticing. She picked up the glass. They sat in the last light, and the house settled around them with the sounds of a house in early winter, the fire, the distant kitchen, the particular creaks of old wood that Charlotte had memorized so completely over 5 months that she could identify each one by location. My father wrote, Nathaniel said. She looked at him. His father was dead. She knew this. Then she understood. Eleanor's father, he said. She was still. He wrote to ask whether the proceedings had concluded, Nathaniel said. He stopped, steadied. He wanted me to know that Eleanor has been living in Baltimore, that she married last year, that she is well. Charlotte held her glass and watched his face. "And," she said, "and I wrote back and congratulated him." He looked at his whiskey. "I thought it would feel larger than it did. When I read his letter, I thought the grief would come back. 3 years of it, and I thought—" He shook his head slowly. "It didn't come back the way I expected." "What came instead?" she asked. He looked at her. "Relief," he said. "That she's well, that it's over, that it didn't—" He stopped. "That it didn't make me who I became because of it. Permanently." She looked at him for a long moment. "It didn't," she said. "No," he said. "It didn't." Outside, the last light was gone. The room was lit only by the fire, and it was warm and it was quiet, and it was theirs, this room, this house, this life they had been building out of what had been available, and what they had made available through sheer work and stubbornness, and the particular faith of people who keep going even when they cannot yet see where they are going. "Charlotte," he said. "Yes." He turned toward her fully. His face was open in the firelight, in a way she had learned to read, not vulnerable, exactly not exposed, but present, entirely present. The way he was when he had decided that whatever he was about to say was worth the cost of saying it. "I know I'm not easy," he said. "I know I have damage that is going to take a long time. I know that some days I am going to fail the conditions you named in September, and I know that you will tell me when I do. And I am trying to be a man who hears that, and does better, and doesn't make you pay for my deficiencies." She waited. "But I need to tell you," he said, "that what I feel for you it is not gratitude. I want to be clear about that. It is not obligation or debt or the recognition that you saved something I would have lost." He paused. "What I feel for you is what I was afraid of in June. What I shut the door against. What I told myself I would never let happen again." His voice was low and steady, and it cost him everything, and he paid it. "You are the most. You are the person I want to tell things to. You are the person I think about when something happens on this property, the first person every time. You are the reason the house feels different than it did before you were in it." The fire settled. Charlotte looked at the man across from her. The man she had not loved in June, had not been asked to love, had been told explicitly not to speak to, and she felt something settle in her chest, with the particular finality of something that has been working its way into place for a long time, and has finally at last arrived. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes." "You once told me never to speak to you." He held her gaze. "I was a fool," he said, "and I have known it since approximately the 3rd day you were in this house." She looked at him. Then she set her glass down, and she stood, and she crossed the small room between their chairs, and she sat on the arm of his chair, and took his face in both her hands, the way she had been wanting to, without knowing she had been wanting to for months, and she looked at him from close range, close enough to see every line of him, every piece of damage, and every piece of what had survived the damage. He looked back. Neither of them looked away. "Then listen to me now," she said. "I'm listening," he said, low, certain, as though he had been waiting. "I did not come to this house to love you," she said. "I came because I had no choice. I stayed because I found work worth doing. I built something here because that is what I do. I build things out of what is available." She felt his hands come up to cover hers, warm and certain. "But somewhere between the grain contracts and the Briggs boy and the fence lines and the assembly hall, somewhere in the middle of all of it, I started loving you. Not the idea of you. You. The specific, difficult, worth it man that you are." He was very still. She felt his hands tighten over hers. "Charlotte," he said. His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. Not the warmth which was familiar now, not the dry humor which she had been collecting for months. Something underneath all of that. Something that had been sealed in for 3 years and was now at last open. "I know," she said. "I'm telling you anyway. He turned his head and pressed his lips to her palm. Not the courtly gesture of the assembly hall, not performance, not symbolism. Just a man choosing to express something his words hadn't finished saying. She felt it through her whole hand, through her whole self. "I love you," he said against her palm. "God help me, I love you in a way I did not think I was capable of anymore, in a way that frightens me considerably, and that I am choosing anyway." She looked down at him. "Good," she said. She slid from the arm of the chair into it properly beside him, which was a small chair for two people and required a degree of closeness that neither of them moved away from. His arm came around her without discussion. Her head rested against his shoulder without ceremony. Outside, Virginia was quiet in its early winter. The fields were dark and still. The house breathed around them. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes." "The northern quarter. When we ride out tomorrow, I want to stop at Mrs. Pierce's on the way back." "All right," he said. "Why?" "Because she told me in June that I reminded her of your mother," she said. "And I want her to see that she was right." A pause. A long one. "She'll say something terrible to me," he said. "Almost certainly," Charlotte said. "She always does. Always." "It'll be good for you," Charlotte said. "I've decided that people who say terrible truths to you are good for you. I'm making it a policy." He was quiet for a moment. She felt against her shoulder the movement of something she had been waiting 5 months for. He laughed. Not a polite sound, not a managed one. A real one, low and warm, and entirely himself, the laugh of a man who has rediscovered that the world can still be on occasion genuinely funny. She held very still, and let it happen, and felt it fill the room, and thought, there he is. There is the man under all of it. There he is. She closed her eyes. His arm tightened. The fire burned. In the spring, when the federal road announcement came, and the northern quarter of Whitmore Estate was confirmed on the primary route, and the land value shifted in ways that secured the estate's future for a generation. Charlotte sat at the dining table with the new survey maps and the estate accounts, and worked through what it meant for the tenant families and the property and the years ahead. Nathaniel sat across from her and worked through his portion, and they passed papers back and forth and argued twice, once about the northern boundary survey, and once about the terms for the Prentice family's lease, which Charlotte felt were too conservative, and Nathaniel felt were adequately fair. And Charlotte won, because she usually did when she had the numbers on her side, and he conceded it with the particular grace of a man who has learned that conceding to a better argument is not defeat, but intelligence. Mrs. Haley brought them dinner at the table because they had forgotten to stop for it. Outside, the Virginia spring was doing what Virginia spring does, reckless and green and entirely committed. Charlotte looked across the table at her husband, difficult, damaged, worth-it man that he was, and felt with the specific clarity of something that has been earned rather than given that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, not because she had been placed here, not because a contract had put her here, but because she had chosen it every single day, with every record she reviewed, and every roof she fixed, and every fence line she walked, and every silence she kept, and every truth she told. She had chosen this, and it had chosen her back. That was not a small thing. That was not an easy thing. That was the only kind of thing she had learned that lasted. She looked back at her papers. "The Prentice lease," she said. "We settled the Prentice lease," he said. "I want to add a provision for the road construction period. They'll need protection if the federal crews come through their land access." He looked up. He looked at her with the full, warm, particular look she had been collecting since August, and would she understood now be collecting for the rest of her life. "Write it in," he said. She wrote it in. Outside, the road that would change everything was coming. The fields were green. The house was full of the sounds of people going about their lives. Greer was in the stables. Mrs. Haley was in the kitchen. The Briggs boy, fully recovered, was somewhere on the east fence line helping with the spring repair. Charlotte Whitmore sat at her table in her home, doing the work she was built for, beside the man she had chosen, and the life they had built from wreckage and stubbornness, and 5 months of refusing to be less than what they were, was solid under them, not perfect, not finished, but solid and real and entirely their own. A woman who knows her own worth does not wait to be seen. She builds until the world has no choice but to look. And when love comes, not the easy kind, not the kind that requires nothing but the kind that is built from truth and humility, and the willingness to be changed by another person, she recognizes it. And she chooses it. With both hands. Without apology. That is what Charlotte Whitmore did. And that was enough. That was everything.